Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing great today. I'm just about to change over to my new system, so I'm really excited for that because literally every single thing, whether it was software or hardware virtually, all seems to have failed on me at the exact same time. Even down to recording this right now. I went to play back a version I just did, the first one, and I can't hear myself back for some reason. But a nice recording because I can see like the blue on the screen where my voice is, so hopefully it's come out normal. It'd be funny if it was distorted because I won't be able to realise until I've actually saved the video, but that's for later on. Now before this starts, I'd like to share something that I think can help people. So when dealing with your own internal battles or mental illnesses, it can be an easy trap to fall into where you compare yourself to others and you might not understand why other people seem to not have anxiety but you do, and then it makes you feel bad. But you have to not care about what anybody else is doing and not make any comparisons to others. You can only ever be yourself, and the other people aren't going to be able to make you feel better if you watch them and think, oh, why are they not anxious, for example, why am I? The most important thing to do is to get help for it. Because I knew for a while when I didn't know what my anxiety was, I used to wonder why everybody else seemed to be able to get on fine, but I should have just been focusing on myself and getting better, and it turned out doing the comparisons was actually making me feel far worse, so it's the thought I think can hopefully help some people. And the other thing too is it's okay to have bad days with your mental health or your internal battles. They're going to happen, it's fine. Don't put too much pressure on yourself or make yourself feel bad if you think, for example, oh, my target's not to have any anxious days, and if they happen, it's fine. Don't beat yourself up over things because they're gonna happen. So hopefully that can make a difference for some people. And there is more I'd like to say, but I literally can't hear myself back, so it's gonna be really difficult and everything's in one take at the minute. And for some reason my current editing software cut out half of the stories I recorded for this video. So what I've done is I've added the new stories that have actually survived my computer onto the last one as a compilation. So if you haven't heard my previous video, then go ahead and watch all of this. If not, I'll put it in the timestamps in the bottom where you can stop listening if you only want to hear new ones. But of course, if you just want to listen to it all, then go for it. So I hope everybody's doing great and enjoys these stories. Take care, I'll speak to you all soon. Now I was very fortunate that my parents owned a property in a very beautiful area. We had miles and miles of woodlands around us, and I don't know, I just fell in love with the place growing up. I actually still live very close to there today. It's only about half an hour away. Now during some summers, or preferably in the winter, I could actually go to the small property that they owned deep in the middle of nowhere. The property in question was kind of like a cabin, but I'm hesitant to call it that because of the scale of it. It was more like a house, but technically not classed as one, if that makes sense. Now, honestly, the best memories I have was being out there on my own. All I needed was a radio for company. I'm not talking about the walkie-talkie one, just the one that you can actually turn on to listen to music. With lots of good memories there was very few bad ones, but there was one experience that I wanted to share with you all today. Now during the winter in question, it was a particularly harsh one. Not that that bothered me too much, because like I said, I love being out there, but you had to be careful not to be caught out at night because of the frostbite or hypothermia that could very quickly take over. One issue I would find is that when you were numb to the cold, you wouldn't really feel your extremities going dodgy. For example, my dad got frostbite really bad on his toes once and actually had to have one of his toes amputated because of it, but at the time he thought he was completely fine. That was until he got home and took his socks off. But to my main story now. During one of these particular winters, I was staying there on my own and having a grand old time as always. The snow wasn't too bad really. It was enough that You'd feel quite cold if you stepped out in it, but not too bad. The trees look beautiful too. What I loved about this particular area is that some of the trees you could actually see through because they didn't have any leaves on them, but others were thick and dense and it looked really picturesque. What I loved more than the trees was walking next to the streams that would flow. Those were the ones that hadn't froze over yet. I don't know, I just thought it looked so beautiful. I honestly can't get over how nice winter is. So in this day in question, it's about midday heading towards the evening when I head out. I say evening because it got dark very quick, but it was only about 5 or so at the time. Now as I'm walking through the path that I would usually take, I realised that nobody else has been here for a long time. I say that because there hasn't been much snowfall now, and there's no footprints other than my own. I look around and I just really think I'm so blessed to be able to live somewhere like this, which is truly beautiful and picturesque. Not a lot of people get to experience things like this as often as I do. There was some sunlight coming through the trees now, so I decided to put on my shades. A lot of people won't realise unless you live out here. Snow can actually be worse than a summer's day for your eyes, because when the snow is fresh set and not really disturbed or pure, it can reflect light massively and give you headaches. One of these headaches was coming on for me now. So the shades go on and off I go. I'm following the stream now because I think it's truly beautiful. I enjoy my walk and decide I'm going to go off for about a couple of hours and just loop back round again. This was before the time that you really had phones, so I was just keeping myself company with my thoughts, something that I often did and enjoyed. As I was walking, I had a strange feeling in my body, like I would suddenly become very warm. It's hard to describe, but it's almost like somebody turned up the thermometer inside my body too warm. I don't know, it kind of freaked me out, man. Like, it felt kind of like I was going to collapse almost, but not at the same time, if that makes sense. I decided I probably got too much on and slowed the pace a bit, because of course your heart rate is going to rise naturally the further you go. I continue through into a more dense part of the forest now. Up ahead of me I can see some logs laying on the road. Well, I call it a road, but it's more of a path, but that was my nickname for it because it was wider than the other paths. I think this is quite strange because it seems like they've fallen very recently. There actually isn't snow covering the bottom of them, which I think's really odd. It literally looks like something's come along, pushed one over and kept going. I look around to see if there's any tracks or anything because god, I really don't want to run into whatever this is. But there's nada. I continue forward and have to go across a log over the stream now. I'm very cautious of this and laughing because I fell in these before and it's very dangerous. It's not funny, but it kind of is to me. I don't know, I guess you make up your own fun on these adventures. I decide I should probably start looping back the other way now, but something was just drawing me into the forest even deeper. Now I can finally see some tracks next to me, and they look really strange. They're almost like giant hoofs, kind of like what a moose would make, but different I guess, and I know there was no moose in this area. It was odd, they just seemed to appear out of nowhere and disappear just like that. There was only about 6 of them, but I thought this was really strange. I thought, it's almost like a giant bird has gone and captured something that just appeared. I continue on my way and I notice there's a lot more trees that have been knocked over here. I actually get a little bit worried now because I know for a fact that they shouldn't be like this. And why is there no other signs of life? I decide not to worry too much and just pick up the pace a bit. I'm no longer worried about being too warm now and decide that I really just need to get back home. I look off to the side and I can see a tree that's collapsed, and this one's big. It almost looks like somebody's done it on purpose to live there. And I might be wrong, but I can see some very faint pinkish colour in the snow next to it. I'm convinced now there's been a large animal here, and as you can imagine, I don't want to be out here and have to fight whatever this is. I have a very small knife on me, but hey, that's not going to do much against some of the animals you get out here. I decide not to investigate the tree that's fallen and keep going. Now I can't describe the feeling, but it was almost like I was stepping into a new unmarked part of the forest that I was in but wasn't my own, if that makes sense. Almost like I've stepped into somebody else's world. The trees seemed much more intimidating now and larger than life almost. This is odd because I've lived out here my entire life and never really had this feeling before. I decide to stop for a second and there's silence. I mean, this is perfectly normal out here, but it just felt different this time. I look around again and there's some more tracks again in the snow. Just the same as before, strange hoof markings, but this time they're in a single file. I think this is odd because most animals actually have two pairs at the same time, and you can normally see the difference with this, but in this case you can't. I think this is really odd, laughing, thinking it's probably an animal that's only got one leg hopping along, because that's exactly what it looks like. Again, I think this is really bizarre, but I must go forward. I don't actually check the direction of these tracks too. I decide to do a light jog just to try and beat the sunlight, and as I'm doing so, I can hear a strange trailing sound off to the side of where I'm standing. I think this is really strange because, again, there was silence up until this point, but I decide to keep going further. Now, God, I was stupid. I'd been out here in the dark now, and if you've ever been in a forest before at night, it's pretty much impossible to navigate. Everything looks exactly the same, and snow can actually pick up and block in where you've come from, so it's not like you can follow your own tracks. Luckily for me, I actually know the direction I have to go in now, and kind of look back to where I was, knowing the direction I come from. Now what I find really odd is that I can see my footprints, but accompanied by the hoofs again in a single file next to me. Now I look behind me and I realise no animal's been tracking me, but it seems really odd. They're at the rough same depth as my own footprints, and for those of you who don't know what that means, basically there's not been any snowfall that's changed the depth between both of ours, so it must have occurred at roughly the same time, but nothing's here. I think maybe it's a hungry animal that thinks I have food I can leave for it. Well, I'm gonna treat it today. I have a protein bar in my pocket and I throw it off to the side. That was dumb. I go and pick it up and break it off more, throwing them in all directions. I don't know what animal this is, but I know for a fact that I don't want it to follow me. I feel a little more safe as I come back closer to where I know I can get back home. Just as I'm making my way forward, there's a strange knocking sound on the tree. It sounds very heavy, almost like it's too loud to be a person that's made the sound. I mean, even with a hammer, it's more like a powerful thud that doesn't make sense. I turn back and I see movement. I can't believe what I'm seeing though. A tree falls just maybe 20 feet from where I was standing. There was nothing around it to make it fall though. And then, a creaking sound, a snap, and a loud thud. This time I feel the ground vibrate next to me. What the hell was that? Another tree falls just next to me. It literally looks like something's leaning on them, pushing them over, but it isn't. Nothing is. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I had to get out of there, so I quickly do a jog. As I start jogging again, I realise that I need to look over my shoulder, but I'm too scared to, deciding I must press on for as far as possible, then stopping to look around. I eventually make it up to a really nice clearing, and I feel safe again. I decide to clear the snow off of a rock and sit down, doing so to make sure I don't get wet. I'm not that far from home now, but I don't know, curiosity gets the better of me. I let out a large hey to see if anybody can hear me or anyone's in there playing games on me, but there's no reply. Dang, I was certain I'd cracked it. It was some stupid kids or loggers who didn't know I was there. Really odd. I decide to walk out into the clearing more now. I can actually see for quite a long way around me at this point, so I'm not really too worried being here. I hear it again though. That familiar sound of a tree falling. I say, God, what now? And just off in the distance, a tree falls. It's quite far away from me, but it was unmistakable. I go, what the hell is happening? An earthquake? It's not possible. Why is this? As I'm standing there, I hear the same again, this time very close to me. I decide that this time I'm going to be brave. Well, by brave I mean standing out of the way from the trees, but I can't believe what I'm seeing. Another tree crashes down just in front of me. I'm pretty sure that I've lost my mind now. I look down and look at my hands, deciding to hit the back of my hand to see if I'm in a dream or not. Nope, I'm not. I can suddenly feel a piercing feeling though in the distance. I don't know exactly how to describe it, but something just feels really odd, and that's when I notice it. Just in the slight darkness of the forest, I can see eyes staring back at me. Now it really looks like a large animal crouching down, but something's different this time. The eyes are red. Not blood red, but just red. It's really strange. I've rubbed my eyes for a second and the thing was still there. No more trees are falling now, but something is very off. Never in my life have I ever seen anything like this. It's honestly like I'm in a dream or movie, but not a good one. One where the ending's bad for the main character. I look around to see if there's anything else, but nothing. Now whatever this thing is has gone. Now I'm met with two options. I can either go back from the way that I've come, or go the opposite direction to where the trees are falling. I decide I should go to the opposite direction and get to the trees. I think it's safer to be away from this thing, and I start sprinting along in the snow. I have to be careful because there's lots of rocks and things on the floor, and I'm quite clumsy at the best of times, so I'm trying my best to be careful here and not get hurt. I have to capture my breath again because if you live in an area where you've never been in snow and ran in it before, it's actually an extremely difficult thing to do. So I have to stop to capture my breath, and I look around, relieved that everything seems to have gone back to normal. I start walking again now, trying to get to the other side back to civilization. I look over my shoulder and there it is again. Eyes following me. Whatever this thing is has definitely got closer to where I am now. Now I don't know whether it's somebody with torches or something messing around with me, but it seems extremely improbable at this point. The strangest thing too is that it doesn't blink once, which makes me think it wasn't some kind of animal. Again, I must press on now. I make it even further along before I have to stop again. I look down to my side and to my horror, the hoof marks have followed me again. Single file, but I've realised this thing is much bigger than I am. I have size 13 feet and this is at least 2 or 3 inches bigger than my own shoe print. How the hell did this appear? What the hell is happening? I feel almost embarrassed to say it, but I panicked now. I don't remember how long it took or how it happened, but the next thing I can remember is me sprinting. I sprint back to the start of where civilization should be and across a small bridge. I slip initially and luckily catch myself on one of the wooden pillars at the side. I could have been in a world of hurt or probably died if I'd slipped through into the ice because not only the cold, but there would be no help here. I look back and there's some movement again. It just looks like a black mass. Now, I can't say for sure at this point whether it wasn't a jogger or not, and I confuse the two, but as you can imagine, I kept going. I just hoped it wasn't a random jogger who was going to be attacked by whatever that thing was. I met with the familiar thud sound again that reconfirms that this isn't a jogger. Another tree's fallen, but this time much further away. This is the first relief that I feel in a long time. I keep going now. Most of the light has faded now, but luckily I know the way back and I can actually follow my footprints in the snow to get back where I need to be. And then I make it back to home after God knows how long. I'm finally back at the start of the civilization, and I don't have to go much further to be back in the warm. I decided that I needed sleep, I needed rest, and that's what I got. I probably slept for a good 12 hours that day. In the morning, I couldn't bring myself to stay for much longer out there on my own, so I called my parents to say that I was going to be going back to stay with a friend. They said sure, that's no worries. A little confused why I come home early, but I said, I just feel like I should be back for a while. And they didn't question me any further. And eventually, I made it over to my friends and never mentioned the story. Now, I've never mentioned this story to anyone because I didn't want people to look at me weird and doubt me or maybe mess up my career. But I don't really have a logical explanation for what happened to me that day. I've never seen anything like it in my life. I would really like to think there was a rational explanation, like, oh, there was some crazy logger going around playing tricks on me, but it just does not seem to be the case. Maybe there's some kind of animal out there that I don't know about. I don't want to call it a Sasquatch because I'm sure it wasn't that and I don't really believe in them, but I don't really know what else to make of it. The best thing I can think of is that it's some strange animal, but what really gets to me is following my footprints and nothing around me. That makes it seem supernatural or paranormal, but it just can't be, surely. I never really got an answer to this and it still haunts me to this day. Every time I look at the forest, I feel half prepared to see them eyes glowing back at me. And every single time there's something that falls on the ground close to me, I get shudders and flashbacks to that experience on my own. I never got answers to what that thing actually was, but I'm not sure I actually want to know. I've never experienced anything like this or heard of any other similar stories, so I just don't know what to think. I decided to go hiking in Kekwa State Park. It's a place I'm extremely familiar with. The weather has been awful lately, so I haven't been kayaking. My time in the state park has been spent kayaking. I was the only person out there because the weather isn't great. I was on the Orange Trail maybe 2 miles in when all of a sudden I had the feeling of being watched. I have a sixth sense for this. I feel I'm being watched and there's normally an 80% chance that I am actually being watched. I stopped and watched for a few seconds. As I started back, I suddenly saw quick-paced movements out in the brush maybe 50 yards away. Something was trying to avoid being seen. Weird. I continue. As I continue down the trail, I continue to feel watched. All of a sudden, I'm walking and hear a maniac laughing in the distance, maybe 20 feet to my left. Now, I was the only person around. I haven't seen anyone in the entire park. I'm very unsettled now, but decide quickly that I must move on and keep up the pace. I tried to put it out of my mind, thinking that I'm just imagining things. Maybe 2 minutes later, I hear the same maniacal laughter off in the distance to my left, but this time closer, and I've picked up the pace substantially. Less than a minute later, I hear the laughter right behind me. There's an enormous amount of rustling and noises coming from the brush. I realised whatever this was right behind me, and I ran. I didn't look back, I just ran. Something told me just run as far as you can now. Within a mile, I was sucking wind. I had every ounce of energy completely depleted for my escape. I ended up becoming too weak to run. I stopped for a rest, but I didn't want to get completely rushed, so I turned around facing the direction that I'd been running from and took a knee. I was starting to calm down, but I still didn't feel safe. I tell myself keep going. As I struggled to my feet, I spotted something in the brush, a dark leather warp. I unfolded it and found 3 extremely sharp knives, like butcher knives, the type you could use to stab someone with. They were fresh. You could tell they'd been dropped off, like, within the same day. I let out an audible yelp when I realised what was inside the sheath. All of a sudden, every ounce of fear came running back. My body was telling myself that I must be very afraid, but I knew I had to keep it moving and not freeze. I ended up running back to civilization. I didn't grab the knives because, well, it would add an immense amount of danger to the situation. I had the feeling of being watched until I was about half a mile from the trailhead. Something was out there. Something that I don't know. Now, I'm not really scared of people, so the fact that my body was telling me to be very afraid and keep moving shows something was very off. So when my friend invited me to go to the Davy Crockett National Forest with him to camp, I was more than happy to oblige. We decided we would camp at Redcliffe Lake Campground for 2 nights, then for the 3rd night, we would stay at a free camping spot somewhere off miles from the park road scattered throughout the forest. So, the first couple of days went amazingly. I loved the smell of the pines, especially in East Texas, and the campsite was beautiful, not to mention the lake. We did some kayaking and hiking. The views there really helped my mindset too. It was awesome. However, on the 3rd morning, my friend got an emergency call and had to bow at the last second. It was slightly upsetting, but didn't necessarily mean that I had to go just because he did. So I decided to stick to the original plan and find a place to camp deep within the forest. After he left, I headed to the nearest forest information center and snagged a map. The map showed the nearby highways in the forest. I scouted a couple of park roads and made my way towards them. Another maybe 5 miles out of town, I find a park road, which is indicated by a numbered sign and is only a dirt road. I head down it and settle in for the adventure. The road wasn't very narrow, but it would have been a hassle to move 2 trucks around each other, which I didn't really encounter. I kept the map on my lap and followed the road with my fingers while also checking the road ahead for potholes. The woods got super dense around me and darker, and it all just kind of enveloped my truck. I don't know how many miles I travelled before I first came to another turnoff, but it was clear I was super deep in the woods. I travelled to where one of the campsites was supposed to be, which was a small loop. I turned down and to my surprise was met with a couple of trucks and RVs, or occupants outside cleaning guns or dressing deers. Now please don't come at me because I've never hunted, but it was hunting season, so I guess this wasn't too much of a surprise. For me though, this is highly off-putting, being with the weird looks I was getting, so I made the loop and continue on. Now I start to feel a little bit better, and drive a couple more miles and found very remote spots at the corner of the woods. I pulled over and set up the tent and a fire, bringing out a bottle of whiskey. I didn't have a great night and was burning some letters, so I got a little bit more messed up. So I ate food, put out the fire, headed into my tent and wind down. It didn't take me too long to fall asleep, and I sleep hard. I woke up at maybe 1 AM to the sound of footsteps circling around my campsite. Now I'm a pretty avid camper, so I just assume it was a critter checking out the human who decided to chill in his pad without asking, and I start to drift off again when I hear a cough. Now I instantly wake up. It was kind of weird, and I just laid there listening for footsteps as they approached my truck. Now luckily for me, I locked my truck, but heard the obvious sound of somebody trying the handle, then quietly shuffled over to the other side and trying the other handle. I had a spotlight that I brought with me, so I quietly unzipped the tent and pointed my light in the direction of the noise and shout out. I catch a brief glimpse of whoever it was in all camos sprinting off into the woods with no light. They took off, like, really, really quickly. I have no plans to follow them. I scanned the brush with my light and can't see anything. I turned off my light to see, but there's not really anything. Instead, I hear very loud crashing into the brush that got quieter and further away. So whoever it was ran into the dark woods with no light and all camo. Now, while considering the map, I know that this person ran off into a direction that doesn't have any roads or amenities. So maybe he was on private property, I don't know, but I was very scared. I just collapsed into my tent and decided I have to move, shoving my tent into the back seat. I get out of there like a bat out of hell basically, and eventually get to the main roads and find my way back to my hometown. I want to go back sometimes, but with my friends and maybe a gun. But yeah, it wasn't a fun experience for me and definitely was one of the most frightening of my life. So in 2015 and 16, I didn't know what I wanted to do after high school and joined a gap year program in the Colorado Rockies, specifically at Snow Mountain Ranch in Gunnaby, Colorado. It's a part of YMCA of the Rockies. It was an awesome gig because although I worked, the room and the board was paid for, and I spent a lot of time hiking, canoeing and adventuring out of the resort with friends I made there, to lots of different towns, and honestly these are some of my best memories. I have some creepy experiences though in the woods, like coming across a small herd of moose at night, hearing coyotes in the distance, knowing that I'm being watched, but overall, it was nature, and although creepy, wasn't anything David Attenborough hasn't seen. The only unexplainable and creepy experience I had was by more than one person when we hiked, but mainly drove, through some old logging roads to an abandoned yurt in the middle of the forest. It's Halloween 2015, and there was a staff party. It was fun, and I went as Gumby in a full costume, but since it's a YMCA sanctioned event, there's no alcohol. We decided to ditch the party, and 7 of us crammed into my friend's Jeep to go make a party of our own. It had snowed, and my friend, who I will call Abby, knew about an abandoned yurt because of one of our fellow staff would go out there and drink by himself, which I thought was pretty weird, but we were all gung-ho and tired of the safety snacks and drinks of the party, so go for it. The snow started to pick up a bit more as we went out there, but since Abby had a decent off-road vehicle, we managed. Now, a bit of context on the yurt and the property. Like maybe a decade prior, there was a pine beetle infestation that killed a lot of trees, so they had to cut down lots of the forest. When I got there, they're in the middle of replanting everything, so logging had ceased since. Since there was miles of older logging roads just abandoned, but the YMCA turned them into Nordic ski trails for the winter time, so the yurt was out there for people who wanted to get out of the elements if they needed. So anyway, we drive out there, blasting Halloween soundtrack, which really helped make an ambience. Although it had been snowing a bit, there wasn't enough on the road yet to create an issue. After about a 30-minute drive into the woods, we pulled off to the side where there was a locked gate, so obviously we jumped it. We had brought pillows and blankets with us because we're going to try and stay the night. We had to walk another 15 minutes to get to it. It was in a really cool spot, like in a clearing at the bottom of a cliff. It was 15 miles into the woods and away from the main property. Time to get messed up. We drank and smoked for a good while and had a lot of fun. We made snow angels and a snowball fight. We went back into the yurt after a while and continued our consumption, telling scary stories. After a while, we start to get sleepy. We got in whatever sleeping bags or blankets we brought and tucked ourselves in. Made a couple of jokes as we fell asleep to break the silence, but after a bit we knocked out. I woke up to Abby's boyfriend shaking me. He points to the window. There was a shadow there all of a sudden, and a loud bang like something threw itself into the side of the yurt. Everyone was up now. The sight of something smacking against the canvas side started coming from all around. At first, I thought it was snow falling off the treetops, but we're in a large clearing with no trees over the yurt. Then, we heard the sounds of something climbing up on the 3 wooden steps and pausing. All of us hold our breaths now, and nothing. Not one sound. Abby was the only girl, and all of us decided that we should rush to the door except for Abby and see what was out there. We opened the door. Nothing. It was quiet as hell. The worst part is that once we've gone outside to investigate a bit, there's nothing. No footprints, no boot prints, or even snow tracks. The snow had blanketed over our prints earlier, so we know it's not ours, which we were looking at before. We thought that maybe the wind had lifted the canvas and made it flutter, but when we checked, it wasn't possible. It was super weird. We thought that maybe the staff member who came out to drink by himself was behind it, but there was literally no boot prints at all. I also don't think it was the wind because me and Abby's boyfriend saw the shadow by the window, and we all heard footprints on the steps. Now this story takes place in the early spring of 2016. I was living in the Rocky Mountains in Colorado and come home to spend a bit of time with my high school friends. One of our favourite things to do was to camp together and hike, since we all had a heavy affinity for the outdoors. On this particular occasion, we decided to tent camp at a park on Lake Georgetown in Georgetown, Texas. It was a public campsite, but I guess because of the time of year, we were the only ones in the park, so with this, we picked a site very close to water. We had a fun night, have a fire going, and drink some mead. Used a hookah in the tent, which was actually a bad idea because coal fell off and burnt a hole through the bottom. And we spoke about random things that we're up to after we graduated. We ended the night by the fire, drinking and eating canned food. One by one, each of us left the fire and retired into the tent. Me and my best friend are the last ones in, since we were right up on the water. We filled up a bucket with lake water, separated the logs and doused the fire. We then both drunkenly meandered our way over to the tent. Now I've always had trouble sleeping. Even when I'm drinking, I tend to just hang around for a bit. So I just lay back, staring up at the stars through the screen ceiling. I'm not sure why I did fall asleep, but I managed to relatively quickly. I do remember waking up with a bright orange light. At first, I thought maybe it was a friend that went to grab something out of the truck, who was unlocking it, triggering the parking lights. But this orange light got bigger and moved too much to be stationary. I unzip the tent flap and see the fires going again. Now, this happened to me before. If you don't douse a fire enough, it can still reignite with enough oxygen, or depending if something was thrown in there, can burn for a while. But then I noticed that there are pieces of fabric and paper and the fire was going. I woke up my friends and they're all as creeped out as I am. That's when we saw something at the end of the brush. There was a guy in a red jacket who had kind of balding hair. He's staring at us with an empty stare with an empty bottle in one hand. It made our blood run cold, but also, being dumb kids, but he already made a head start. And that's before we made the decision. He was already getting away. We left the next day and called whoever manages the park about the incident. We had checked the fire to see if there was anything salvageable, but unfortunately everything is incinerated. They told us that the Georgetown PD would do more rounds in the park, but that was about it. We quickly forgot about it because it was a pretty one-off experience and the dude didn't hurt us directly. And of course, we all started going to college and stuff, but it was still a pretty scary experience for all of us. Working as a park ranger, there was lots of crazy things that I've seen out in the woods on my own. I'll go through a few for you today. I remember one time one of my colleagues radioed in saying that he was sure he saw a meteorite or a white UFO crash in the distance one night. I said, okay, I don't know what you've taken, but I'm gonna go and investigate, half joking with him. As I set out in my truck, I realised that there was some kind of emergency beacon, and my god, he wasn't wrong. There was a fire trail in the woods that luckily hadn't spread, and, half expecting to find something from out of this world, I was very surprised to find a plane that had crashed. By the grace of God, everybody lived from the accident and was fine, but it was crazy to see. Honestly, it was like something out of a movie. Now that was my first story. The next one is a complete different thing. It was when I was on vacation in a desert with some of my cousins. Now we were going on this long hike and it was close to nightfall. Now my youngest cousin kept on sprinting off, and it didn't bother us because a few of us were actually rangers or had military experience, so we felt relatively safe. Now, my cousin twisted his ankle and we're all quite annoyed because we know how dangerous this is. If it's a fracture or break, it's going to take a while before we can get back to help. Now, I rush over to go and help him, and I also fall down too. I fall down onto rocks and land on some kind of scrub or destroyed wood. I don't really know how to describe it, but almost like a big bit of wood that's been there for years that was once a tree. Now this thing snaps and my other cousin grabs my arm and says, "Jesus Christ." I say, "Yeah, I know it's slippery here." He says, "No, look." He then shines his torch off to the left and I can see literally hundreds of cactuses below. It was a good 20 feet drop down off of these rocks too. If I had fallen into them, well, I don't even want to think about what could have happened. More than anything, I was just glad that my youngest cousin hadn't gone and got hurt, because God, I wouldn't be able to forgive myself if that happened. Now, for my next story, this is more just creepy than anything. I wouldn't necessarily say it was a paranormal experience, but just something really odd. Now, while I was working as a ranger, one particular evening I got a call out to go and investigate a potential illegal fire, and I thought, yeah, that's fine. I wasn't too worried about it. To be honest, normally the fires in the area that I was working in didn't spread very quickly, so you didn't have to worry much. It wasn't like there was going to be huge wildfires, and the firefighting service were extremely good where I was based. I radio in and say I'm only about 10 minutes away, I'll go check it out. Now, I remembered going to investigate this area, and when I got there I can't see anything. There is, however, a strange light just above the tree line. I think this is really odd. It's not like a plane or helicopter, more like a drone, but this was actually in the times before we had drones, so I think this is a bit odd. It eventually flies off really quickly, and I think maybe the military are doing something here. Eventually I make it back to the station and radio in what happened. Someone else answers saying, "Thank God. We haven't heard anything back from you for hours. What happened? We're really worried about you and we're starting to investigate." I confused, say, "No, I was only out for probably 20 minutes. What are you talking about?" I then look over to the clock and I realise that I've been out for a good 5 hours. Even to this day, I still can't explain the experience, and it kind of gives me chills in a way. Now, for my last experience, it's kind of a weird one, but I want to know what you guys think about it. So this story actually comes from a friend of mine and not me directly. He said that he was out on a hike one day when he becomes completely lost. Now, he was lost to the point that he thought he wasn't going to make it back, and he didn't have any communication equipment at the time. He had basic survival training, so was actually okay, but he really thought he wasn't going to make it. Now, one morning when he was trying to figure out what to do or praying for signs of rescue, he sees a yellow dog up ahead of him. He's convinced that he's hallucinating, but he goes over to see what it's doing. It's playing with something in its mouth, and he quickly grabs it off, realizing that it's his shoe. He puts it on again and says, "Hey buddy, what are you doing here?" With the dog beginning to walk off. He decides to follow it. The dog keeps looking back and pointing almost in the direction to go. He says he's accompanied by the dog for at least 2 hours until eventually it runs off down an area that he can't actually see into. Worried about losing his friend, he sprints off after it and he's met by a group of other people. It's a search and rescue team. One of them runs over giving him water saying, "How are you?" He says, "Great, your dog must have saved my life." He looks at him a bit weirdly then at his buddy and says, "You need some water, bad." And eventually he gets taken off to a hospital. He eventually recovers and is completely fine. He goes to ask some of the rescue team what happened to the dog. Was it a wild one? And they say, "There was no dog there. We didn't know what you were talking about. We thought maybe it was a stray one and you got bitten or something and were going crazy, so we had a look round, but there was definitely no dogs." Now what makes this even more weird is the fact that my friend still has that shoe to this day, with clear bite marks from a dog that couldn't be made by a person. Now I'm very lucky where I live. There's a beautiful forest and river that's not too far away. The river starts near the houses and the people, but if you follow it down long enough, you can eventually get over to a really nice secluded area of woodland. Now, I was previously a forest ranger, so as you can imagine, I always like to be out in nature and exploring generally. Now, for a while I didn't actually go out much. I still wanted to explore and whatnot, but I couldn't be bothered where it was extremely cold, so I waited until it became around April, May time, and I once again started following the river. The river had some birds and things on it, and some other big fish that you would very occasionally see in the river. I never bothered to fish any of these because I couldn't be bothered to, but I thought it was a really nice touch. Often I would find myself putting in my headphones, listening to some kind of book or just relaxing music and having a stroll down. I don't know, sometimes you can feel like the world's getting on top of you for no reason, and it's important to just get outside to relax. So in one particular morning I was doing just this. Now I know what you're thinking, surely if anything scary was going to happen it would be at night, not in the very early hours of the morning, but wait, I'll get to that part. So I set off like normal. I decided to stay far from the river because the rocks actually really hurt my feet sometimes and I have an issue with them. I say hello to one of my friends as I'm walking and I can see that he's just sitting by the rocks having a good time relaxing. People are good, but at this moment I need to get away just to clear my head up. It's still pretty warm at this time, though the weather's been very bipolar. I continue down until eventually I'm just out of sight of the other people. Now the area that I live in doesn't really have many people to begin with, so you don't have to go very far to be truly secluded or in what feels like the middle of nowhere, and often is. Now when I'm walking, I see a very large thing flying out of the corner of my eye. I just catch it before it goes off into the tree line, and I realise there's a very large bird there. It's strange because it looks all black and its beak looks very big. I think this is pretty strange because I've not really seen these before. It's hard to describe, but it's like a larger than life crow. I think this is odd and I continue onwards. I turn off my music for a while because I want to save my headphones and phone battery. I continue going and the forest gets a little bit darker, just because there's not much tree coverage. You have to be careful while you keep following this river though, because of course, the further you go in, the harder it is to get out, and I don't really want to be stuck out here alone. Now every so often, I hear this god-awful noise coming from the bird. I can't describe it other than just saying it's a horrifying sound. It's almost like a screech that sounds like it's human, but it's not quite. I haven't heard anything like it since too, which is pretty odd. I assume that it's gotta be another animal that this bird has just gone and annoyed, because surely this isn't making that much sound. I really wish I could describe it to you, but I can't. It's almost like a piercing sound, like metal being scraped, but more biological sounding. It really throws me off when I'm walking because it makes me jump and my eyes actually go blurry for a second from the adrenaline and the panic of it. I decide I should just keep on now. Now, one really strange thing about this is that the bird seems to be following me. Now, I might be paranoid, but I decided to pick up a rock just in case I needed to scare this thing off. I mean, hey, it was ruining my lovely day for me. But eventually, along with my new friend the rock in my pocket, I forget about the bird and continue on my way. As I continue walking, I can see some strange markings on some of the trees. I think the children, or not really children, I guess teenagers or rebels, whatever you want to call them, have gone and put some weird red spray paint onto some of the trees. They're kind of like weird cross symbols, but not exactly. I know this hasn't been marked out by authorities because I know what that looks like from my previous experience of being a ranger. I make a mental note to maybe report this to the authorities so they can stop these stupid kids destroying the beautiful nature. God, I really hate things like that. I love nothing more than untouched nature. I hate when people don't realise the damage they're doing, and that if they do this over time, it's not going to look good. Plus, it's probably not very healthy for the trees, but I digress. I continue on to my walk until it's about midday. The sun's still nice and high in the sky, and I'm just sitting down to relax for a bit. I decide that I can't really be bothered to walk much further because my feet have started hurting from walking on the rocks close to the stream, and I want to get back to eat. I'm starting to get hungry. I have 2 small protein bars, but they aren't really doing it for some reason. As I'm sitting down, I realise that the hair on the back of my neck has stood up suddenly. I think maybe a mosquito's landed on me, and I actually slapped the back of my neck to try and kill it if there is. Nothing. I just slapped myself for no reason. I think that's a little odd. I suddenly noticed some movement again in the distance. Now, I can't make out exactly what it is, but whatever this is on the ground now, and I know for a fact it's not that bird. I think maybe there's some animal around. I'm not really in an area that has big bears or animals like that I have to be scared of, but you never know. If one of these things is hungry and injured or thinks I'm trying to get to its babies, I don't really want to be standing in its way. I decided I should pick up the pace and go a little further. It's starting to get cold too, which is annoying because I've only got my light jumper and shirt on. I originally had the jumper tied around my waist but quickly put it on. Now, as I continue on, I can't shake the feeling that something is just off. I was kind of triggered by the symbols, and that starts to race through my mind again. As I continue on, I stop suddenly and realise something looks off. I look off to the left, and I'm sure I can see somebody standing by a fire moving round. I look to the right just to make sure there's no other ones, and to my left again, and the person vanishes, but where they were standing is exactly the same. It looks a little odd because there's lots of foot tracks around, and they look recent. I decide I should be very cautious now, and slow down for a minute, stop, breathe, and just observe. I definitely can't hear anything, and I decide that it's just my mind playing tricks on me. Now I know what you're thinking, oh, you're a ranger, this shouldn't happen, but trust me, if you're in a job that's that isolated, you actually get used to the fact that sometimes your mind's going to fill in the gaps. It's not necessarily from you being bored, but more your brain. There's a thing where your brain tries to create images that aren't actually there, and I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but look it up and you'll know what I mean. So, I hesitantly make my way over there. As I get there, I realise that the ground seems to have been burned recently by a fire. It's almost like a bunch of people have been dancing around here, but I can't figure out exactly why this is. I look around and there should be people here. The fire's only gone out recently, but there's no one. And then, just to my left, I see movements out the corner of my eye again. I'm not sure why, it always seems to be on my left side no matter where I move to. I actually rub my eye to make sure that nothing's in it. And then, I think, what's he doing out here? Why did he make a fire here? I say, hey, and my friend's name, what are you doing? And then there's just laughter. Now the strange thing is, the laughter doesn't seem like my friend, if that makes sense. It's still my friend's voice, but it's not welcoming. I say, hey, where are you? What are you doing? Now I realise something is off. I look around and I cannot see my friend anywhere, but I keep hearing my name being called out. I say, yeah, this is really funny, but what are you doing? I look around and again, I can't see anything. I say, hey, that's really funny, but I'm gonna go now. The voice then says, no you're not, followed by more laughing. Now I'm not afraid to use it. I turn around to leave and the large bird is there, just staring dead at me, almost like it's been waiting. I actually dropped the rock in fear. I didn't realise this at the time because of the adrenaline. It sounded almost like the laughter sounds were coming just from this bird. I pick up the rock again and start clapping, trying to make sounds for it to move, but it doesn't. It's something that I've never seen before. It's literally like a crow, but maybe 3 times as big or 4 times as big as a normal crow. And it doesn't seem to have eyes. I can't really tell because I didn't have my glasses on at the time, but it does not have eyes. I'm almost convinced of this. And I get a really weird feeling wash over me. I hear something behind me. I glance over my shoulder and glance back, and the bird's gone. That's about all I needed for my brain to tell me it's time you get out of here. So, I decide to start out with a more medium pace. I don't want to burn myself out, and my trainers told me that it's much better that you hike and you don't get injured than if you just sprint out of here. But this feels more urgent now. Now I'm a relatively big guy, I guess, or maybe medium, I don't know. But I know if I really launch a rock I can probably hurt something. So I have my rock in my hand ready to just attack. Now I decide something's definitely off, and I know it's not my body playing tricks on me. We used to mess around with each other in the ranger station some days, but never like this. I mean, this is ridiculous even for me. But if this was them playing tricks on me, I'd probably respect it and actually find it really funny, but I decide I have to get on. I think what's weirdest is that the bird's followed me so far. I'm not sure whether it's very injured and it wants to eat me when I'm dead like vultures do, but this isn't a vulture. I decide that I should probably get out of here as quick as possible, and great for me, the easiest way to get back is following the river. I've not really been this far into the forest too, so I decide that I can't really afford to get lost here, and it'll probably get quite cold at night and I'd struggle if I couldn't make a fire. I didn't have a lighter on me at the time, so I know this isn't really an option. Again, with my training I can actually make a fire, but I'm not gonna. So I continue going. I continue a mild pace for about 5 minutes before I have to stop because the rocks are really hurting my feet again. I stop for a few minutes and start laughing to myself, thinking, what was wrong with me? And there's a loud splash just to my left again. Why does this keep coming from my left, I say as I slap myself on the side of the head, just enough to try and wake myself up. And there's a large splash of water that just hits me. A large rock has just been thrown into the water next to me, and there's that stupid crow. I throw a rock as hard as I can and it just flies out of the way. What the hell is this thing, I think to myself. Why is it following me? I now break some of my own rules and panic a bit and start sprinting. This is accompanied by laughter of my friend's voice again. Now, you can imagine I went into high gear now. Through the grace of God, I actually didn't hurt myself on the rocks or fall. Well, not for a few minutes at least. I eventually tripped and hurt my leg, and I started laughing to myself as I got up again, saying, "This is such a me thing to do," and I continue going. The laughter becomes ever more faint as I continue on, trying desperately to get back. I sprint for a long time, and luckily I'm fairly athletic, so I managed to make it out of the secluded area into a more medium part, if that makes sense, where you're not too far from civilization. I turn around again and realise that I can no longer hear the laughing, and I don't think the crow thing's following me anymore. After a bit longer, I realise that I'm up to relative safety now, and I'm not far from where my friend is. I'm very, very relieved to realise that. When he sees me, he says, "Hey, what's wrong?" I say, "Yeah, I just had a bad fall, I'm fine," and continue on. I made it home, and of course the first thing I did was call my friend, saying, "Hey, what are you doing right now?" He says, "Oh, I'm just at home with my wife and kids. We've been home all day." I don't need to hear anything else and say, "Oh great," make up some excuse and end the call. That was confirmation in my mind that this is one messed up situation that I still don't have an explanation for to this day. I don't know what that bird thing was doing or who that person was out there, but I'm glad I never had to find out. I would hate to say it was anything paranormal, but my mind instantly goes to some of the old folklores about creatures out in the woods that can imitate yourself or others. I don't want to say it was that, but I kind of hope it was, because if it wasn't the case, it was probably people with speakers trying to capture or kidnap me, but I just don't think that seems likely with where I live and everything. I don't know, it was a pretty awful experience that I'm trying my best to forget about. And yes, I haven't been back to that area since. Even if I do my own solo hikes now, I don't ever have my headphones in. I'm always listening, expecting to hear that crow or my friend's laughter again. I was hiking with my dad in late September on the west coast of Vancouver Island, which is usually when bears are flanting up for the hibernation are most likely to be aggressive, and since we're a couple of days walk from either the trailhead, we're on high alert. This is where we can only get medical attention, so we're far from safety. It's a rain constantly, and we only had seen a single other hiker the whole time. He was travelling the opposite direction, and we had camped beside him 2 nights prior, so for the whole trip, the only tracks that we saw looked remotely fresh, and were a single set of boots hiking coming towards us. It was a pleasant and solitary German tourist, and we'd only seen them in places with extensive overhead cover. The other tracks were washed out and filled with rainwater due to the days and days of constant rain, and it was really making it hard to figure out where to go at times. We were approaching a blackberry patch between ridges and hugged a small creek and smelled what we thought was a particular stinky bear, and since the blackberries were on both sides of the trail, with it only being about 3 meters between them, we have our heads on a shrivel. There was no overhanging trees at this particular berry patch, and there were dozens of meters across, and they're probably 2 meters high. My dad told me to hurry through as quick as we can and made a comment about how smart it was that we have the bear bells on us, and how dangerous it is to startle a feeding bear. He was a couple of meters ahead of me when I looked down and see a footprint. Now, it looked like an unshoed human footprint, except it's probably 2 inches wider and at least 2 inches longer than mine, and I have size 14 feet. There's also dermal ridges and only a couple of inches or so of raindrops, so it had been there recently. I mean, the scariest thing about it was that there was no other prints whatsoever, so it just appeared suddenly almost. It was so startled, probably, but so was I. I looked around as much as I could before my dad lovingly told me, "Hurry up," and that was the only track that there wasn't now a small puddle in. So before you discount it as double stepping bear prints, where a bear's gone back before. There's no way it could have crossed that 3 meter distance without leaving more prints. Say what you want about black bears. They're not peaceful or graceful. There are also no grizzly bears here too, and there's no cougar that could have done this. It was also not a hoax too, because we would have definitely seen a person there, and to be interacting with the bears was dangerous to say the least. Now it's pretty weird though. We eventually managed to make it out of there without too much happening, but I don't really believe in Sasquatches, but I don't know what to believe. The more my dad explained it to me, it couldn't have really been a bear, so I don't really know what to think. And on top of that, the smell there was one of the worst things I've ever smelled in my life. I will never forget the image of the raindrops hitting the fresh tracks as I stared in disbelief. I grew up in a small town in western Massachusetts. It was a sleepy little community, and not much happened in the way of excitement, but this weekend we were going camping. It was a Memorial Day weekend, and it just turned 11. When we got to the campground and got set up, we were mainly by ourselves, and we only saw a few other families along the trail on the way to our campsite, and it was really peaceful. And after a long day of setting up and getting situated, I'm ready to crash out on my tent. Help me, help, oh God, I hear. I woke up like an alarm had gone off, and I can hear this woman screaming at the top of her lungs. She came running into our campsite and was in absolute hysterics with fear. My parents approached her to ask if she was hurt and offered her help. She pushed past and kept running, all the while screaming. We followed her to the ranger station, as did a few other people from nearby campsites. She woke up the entire campground with her screaming. I remember the police showing up and all the flashing blue and red lights. 2 officers were standing around her as the paramedics wrapped her in blankets. She kept saying the same thing over and over again. It's a werewolf, it has to be. The paramedics load her up in the ambulance and it drives away. A few more cops appear and begin searching through the woods. My dad said go back into the tent and sleep. I don't know what happened after that. Sometimes I still talk about the nights that it happened with my parents. We all remembered it and it still gives us goosebumps. I don't know what the girls saw in the woods that night. I don't know if it's still out there. So this story takes place in southeast Texas, within 100 miles of Houston. I was in college but had moved back in with my parents for a semester after some roommate drama. My parents live out in the country, miles outside of town with some acreage. The land in the back of the house consists of 4 zones really. You got to the backyard with the nice St. Augustine. The back, which is a section of woods my parents cleared of underbrush and kept a fairly well-maintained area. The back, which is a clearing that we used to go back to and do bonfires and parties in high school, and then the woods. After high school, my parents kind of gave up on keeping back the brush and weeds and anything except for their nice section of backyard. So imagine a big backyard fenced by a wall of tall weeds and large trees that goes back for a while, then a giant field of weeds, transitioning into soil and dense woods and some oak and pine wood. I also had this dog that my parents let me keep outside. I had a big chain-link dog who lived in there since my parents had no permitting fencing besides some barbed wire at the very back of the property, and this dog wasn't really the kind to stay in one area. It was a fact that she was so aggressive to other dogs, always going after them and acting tough. I sometimes worried she'd go out and get some of the chickens. She was about 60 pounds too. Now since I was in college, I had no curfew or anything and would always come home late at night / early morning after hanging out with friends or studying or whatnot. On this particular night, it was pretty cold out. Even though she still had a house and bed and straw out there, I felt bad for my dog, so decided to bring her in to sleep in the garage. I should mention, now I probably should have been more careful because this happens quite a lot, but somehow this dog always got me. She would wait in the back until the gate was unlocked, and I was in the run, the gate closed with the unlocked horse latch. Run around me and pop the gate latch with her nose and bolt off, so of course she did it. And I was standing there in the cold in the middle of the night, annoyed because I knew I had to find her and return her. The moon was pretty bright, and I had seen her flying into the weed wall and disappear, so I followed her into the night, calling her name. There were some little trails through the weeds, and we tried to keep open so that we can access the property, but they were less wide than a person can walk through, and the weeds are taller than my head. It was dense. Anyway, I'd gone a ways, and we had passed through the wooded section out into the clearing, and I get quiet, trying to listen to where she's gone, and I hear intermittent rustling out in the woods, which at this point I've got to point out is a really dark outline of the tree line and weed jungle. The rustling wasn't the sound I expected, since she usually crashes through the woods. In my head, I'm thinking, what the hell is she doing now? Honestly, I thought she's probably rolling around in some dead skunk, and I was gonna have to bathe her. Figuring it was my wild dog making the noise, I call out her name again. As I got closer, it becomes apparent the rustling is not the sound of an animal charging through the underbrush, but more like something intentionally shaking the trees. Like if you grab a branch and shake it, and all of the connected trees and vines shake too. It was close enough now to make out individual branches silhouetted at the top of the tree line, and I could see that whatever was going on was causing the trees to shake all the way to the top. This was off, and decidedly not my dog pacing around. I'm quiet and freeze. I hear in all these stories people talking about how they notice something in the woods go silent. I can't remember this happening really, but as I stood there, I clearly hear 2 or 3 loud deep huffs. I guess it kind of sounded like a ball with a deeper fluctuating, kind of fluttering sound. And it seems to be coming from around my head height. For some reason, my mind kept registering that this thing was a lot closer to me than the tree line. I remember the distinct feeling that the noise is directed towards me, and I get a feeling in my gut like my whole body is stuck. Now, rational or not, I yell my dog's name, and with all my fear and urgency, I turn and ran as hard as I can. Either my dog heard my tone and got scared, or she was scared of whatever was in the tree line, because as soon as I crash through the weeds, she comes up on my left like a bullet. When I got to the open garage, she was trying to get in, desperately jumping. I closed the garage and put her in the kennel and went to bed. I don't know what it was, and at the time I convinced myself it was one of those hog sealers that you hear about on the news. I've been around plenty of cattle and have never heard one make a noise like that. Not saying it could have been something dodgy, but it just doesn't seem right. This was like 10 years ago, so I'll never know for sure, but I'm trying to think real hard of what it could have been in terms of a logical explanation. My uncle has a large area of wooded property in Missouri. It's about a 1.5 hour drive from St. Louis. He has a cabin there, a small man-made lake, and trails throughout the woods. When we visited, we would spend a lot of time driving ATVs down the trails. One of the trails leads to an abandoned mining area. The area has a toppled over mine shaft, a couple of cement buildings, and a sheet metal storage shed for core samples. And the sheet metal building with showers has a couple of rooms. There's a metal fence separating the 2 sections of it, which are mostly intact. A lot of the area hasn't been used for mining for lots of decades, probably even a century. All of this lies in a large open area that has no trees and just sand and mud flats, which made it a perfect place to drive 4-wheelers. We'd visit a few times each year, and take out the 4-wheelers out to the flats and have a great time riding. We never felt unsafe, and sometimes we would even go out to night to stargaze. Eventually we began to realise that there's these sites popping up at the edge of the woods around the flats. like sticks stuck in the ground, in lines or weird circle patterns, almost like burn piles. And there was eventually shotgun shells, bullet casing, and beers around sometimes. We'd even see weird symbols on the floor. It was made out of trash or spray painted. Basically, it looked like people were shooting targets and drinking out on the flats with a touch of weirdness with the symbols. I didn't really think much of it, and we just decided that we wouldn't go out at night and started carrying guns around with us when we go out. What finally did it for me and kept me from going back out there is when we discovered that the fence has been nearly completely destroyed. Only the posts are left, and on every post there's some can or jar of something on top. And throughout the flats on the trails, it's rampant with these weird things everywhere. Kind of like containers stuck onto the end of branches and whatnot. Again, it wasn't too weird. Like, we know people like to go out on break and stuff and just do stupid things, but what got us was the scope of it. The fence was probably half a mile in length and every section of metal mesh had been removed, which would have been considerable because it would take a long time to do it and you'd actually need bolt cutters. And that alone wouldn't be too weird, but the thing is, none of the metal was gone. That was probably the most valuable thing. I would understand if they took the metal, but why would they just leave it there perfectly intact? Now, the last time that I was actually brave enough to go out there was 10 years ago. I've now moved states and have limited contact with that part of the family, so I don't know if anything else has happened. So it's nothing paranormal, just really weird. My husband and I always love to go camping. We live in CA and set aside 2 weeks every summer for a camping trip where we can get away and disconnect from the real world. Normally, we hit Death Valley for some backcountry adventures for a few days, then heading up into the mountains for some fishing. On the way back home, we usually stop for one last hurrah in Eastern Sierra. On this particular trip, my husband, myself, and our German Shepherd, Ginger, are going. We ended up finding a lake to swim in for the day, and when we got tired, decided to find a spot to camp. We were both pretty familiar with that area, and knew that there was a free campground about 12 miles up the mountain. I never liked the Pacific campground because it was very cold at night at that elevation, even in the summer, but whatever. It was free and we had plenty of firewood. We pulled into the campground and there was only one tent pitched, but we didn't see any people at all. In fact, the whole evening there was not a single other person in sight. I loved it. It's really nice when it's empty and it feels primitive and nice and remote, so it was rare even to see a car driving past. After we got set up, the beer was flowing very freely. We were pretty trashed and hung out for a bit, cooked dinner over a campfire and hit the sack. My dog husband and I were all asleep and awoken by an ungodly scream in the middle of night. One of us grabbed the phone to see what time it was, and then my husband gets his gun, told me to stay there, and went out to see what was going on. Of course I want to peek out, and there was one guy standing right in front of the other tent that was set up across the stream, looking at the sky and just screaming. It was a horrific scream, loud and terrifying, normally just like something that would prompt a phone call to the police, but due to the area's remoteness, the cell signal is non-existent. My husband didn't want to go over there for obvious reasons, so he came back to the tent, and I don't think any of us slept a wink the rest of the night. The next morning we packed up and left as soon as we could. That same tent was still there, but again, no one in sight. We actually drove past there a couple of days later, out of curiosity, and the tent was still pitched in the same spot. There were no other campers there. This is about 10 years ago, and when we visited the area frequently, this was about 10 years ago, and we still visit the area frequently, since we now have a cabin about 20 miles from the campground. When we take a drive up the mountain and pass that campground, The scream is always the first thing we think about and wonder what was happening. I'm gonna try and keep things clean and concise and to the point, so I'm gonna start with the creepy but natural. I've been a hunter since I was like 13, maybe earlier, so I don't really remember, but being out in the woods since I was young means that I get to see or hear things that I can normally ensure that I wouldn't see in the cities. I've had a few different instances where I've been thoroughly creeped out in the woods, and I'll get to them, but I want to start with a not as bad one. So the guy who owns the land that we hunt on decided it was going to be a good idea to store some of the equipment on his land, one of which is a styrofoam float. Now, one year we got out there to check it out and pick it up, and that big piece of styrofoam had met its demise to a bear. Now you could tell that the bear really had a go at this thing because it was torn to shreds. Now, it almost looks like a bomb had gone off next to it. It makes you kind of worried about what bears are actually capable of. But anyway, now to the first real story. I was stalked by a cougar a few years back. When we had a deeper opener, I liked walking through the roads occasionally, and one of the first things I noticed this year is that I could have taken a picture of a set of tracks, really big tracks. I wish I did. The cat was obviously stalking over other animals in the area, but me being me, I decided that I shouldn't be scared of that, and it's probably more scared of me, but sure enough I jinxed myself. I attempt to do a deer push through some of the real thick brush to try and jump up and scare a deer, and get it to move through towards the other hunters in my party. I'm going to get to that soon, and I'm moving through the woods, yet I can hear something moving behind me. Every time I would stop, the noise would stop. I eventually got nerved, especially with the forest being quiet, and I decide that I'm going to get attacked by something that's found me. It's probably better if I'm facing it. So I turn around and walk straight back the way I came from and raise my weapon. When I began retreating back to where I come from, directly towards whatever it was making the sounds, I see a tan flash of fur and a long tail low to the ground turn around and run away from me. Then, the next day as I was doing a walk up to the main road with my rifle, I'm close to the tree line when I hear a deep growl. Immediately to my right, I turn my rifle to see the face of the cougar at my stomach level because it was raised up on the ground and towards the dirt. I calmly backed away and walked up towards the road that I came from. Now for wolves. One of my favourite ones, and it's quite a simple one. A few years back, my dad shot a deer and we gutted it. If anyone here is familiar with the field dressing of an animal, you typically gut the pile just out in the woods. This was like that this year, and we found out that there's a wolf pack that had actually moved onto the property. So, my dad leaves a gut pile a couple of 100 yards away from the stand. The day after, I was sitting in my dad's stand while he was doing a big loop on the property trying to scare deer towards me, and he was getting close to me, which I didn't know at the time. I was sitting in the stand and I heard a kind of wolf yelp from the gut pile. I texted my dad and told him he better hurry up because there's a wolf pack between us. Sure enough, by the time he made it back to me, he also heard the same thing, and it was within less than 100 yards away now. This year, just in November, I actually took pictures of old tracks very close to the trail and next to my size 13 boot, and the tracks are huge. I know there's one set of 4 that are walking together. I took a picture of the biggest tracks and I found out the wolf's probably 200 pounds or more, so it's definitely something you don't want to encounter out there. Now, for the one that sticks with me, this is the one that I want you guys to hear. Somewhere around 2006 or 7 when I was a late teen, I was at my grandpa's cabin and with my grandparents and my cousin. This was the last summer in northern Wisconsin, Danbury to be specific. The incident happened in midday when the sun was high in the sky and it was pretty warm out. My cousins and I decided that We would play some airsoft, and I was wearing camouflage and decided that I would have a better chance of not being seen this way, and being able to ambush him by going into the woods, which was about an acre attached to where the cabins are off to, though it was really an acre that my grandparents owned. Now there were trails cut through, and a big entrance which splits into a Y and loops around. This was used as a short ATV trail. Now while we're battling with the airsoft guns, we continue all the way up into the trail about halfway. We were still both winded and at the top of the hill next to a clearing in the woods when I decided to mess with my cousin and shush him and say we're being watched. Now mind you, I intended this as a joke, but we both got quiet. I realised the woods were dead quiet, like you could hear a pin drop. I could only hear my own breathing and immediately feel like we're being watched, so I look in the directions all around us and try and figure out where this thing's coming from, scanning from edge to edge, and look into a clearing that goes down to a hill and a watering hole or pond or something. We're sure we're gonna see animals there. I scan left to right, then back and halfway on the right, really trying to focus on what was going on. That's when it came into focus, when I saw teeth. Teeth in the mouth of what looked like a wolf panting, except it's very tall. I mean, it's probably like to my stomach or chest height, and I'm 6'4". As I was taking in these details in a short amount of time, I realised the thing is staring at us, maybe even more at my cousin who's smaller than me. And I also realised that this wolf was not on all fours but crouching on its back legs against a tree, with its arms wrapped around the tree. That's right next to its arm. And this thing's almost holding its arms out to us with its long claws. In the short time that I looked at it, I said to my cousin that we have to go. Now my cousin took off like a bat out of hell. Being a baseball player, he was a bit quicker than me. He ran and I looked back at the creature and it locked on with laser focus, took my cousin and stood all the way up and began running towards us, which makes me run. What I remembered from it is that it was significantly taller than me, completely upright, and when I ran, I could hear it crashing through the woods behind me. After running and running, we eventually reached the wire, and this thing is standing there, waiting for me. I tell my cousin go go go. We ran into the parking area by the shed and stopped talking because it sounded like it stopped chasing us now. At this point we agree we can't tell our grandparents because what we saw essentially appears to be a werewolf and probably is more likely a bear, but I don't know. Unfortunately my cousin never actually got a look at it other than just a flash of reddish fur, maybe more of a brown colour, but then again, he's lucky because every time I think about it I get scared. I'm leading up to this and even afterwards, I've always had a bad feeling about that night. Now, whenever I'm by the campfire I always feel like I'm being watched. One of the things for you guys to memorize is that if you're out in the woods, if the woods go quiet eerily, most likely there's a large predator in the area. If you have a gut feeling, you should just follow it. Gut instincts are the reasons that our ancestors stayed alive. If I'd frozen fear, we would have died. I have one last thing to add, which is from a few years ago, when I was hiking with my wife in a local park. We got followed by an unknown animal. As we're moving up through the trails through the woods, there is something tracking us, moving as we're moving, stopping while we stop. What made this weird is that it wasn't like a normal animal, but it sounded like we were really being followed tree to tree, and it sounded big. The reason why I said this is the thing chased me and my cousin, and people say that it's a dog man. They say that they're intelligent and apparently good at tree climbing. I also say that these creatures are apparently really good at following people, and seemingly managing to stay out of sight for a long while. Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing great today and enjoyed these stories. Make sure you check out my Patreon for early access to my videos, which is in the description, and my podcast too for the audio form of these videos. And also I use Instagram at Insomniac Horror if you want to check that out. Hope everyone's doing great today and enjoys these stories. Take care, I'll speak to you all soon. Now I had a house which was in a very nice wooded area. My dad used to be a forest ranger, so as you can imagine, we'd always used to go out camping together or exploring the wilderness and woods. Now, I've had a few experiences, but this one in particular happened when I was only 12 years old. Now, I say only 12 years old, but at the time, I might as well have been a 50-year-old. Having grown up in the wilderness, I was very confident there and actually had no issue being out there alone. Now, there was one particular adventure that we went on that stuck out in my mind. Not really until years later, and I brought it up again with my dad. I'll explain that more later on. Now, for some backstory. My dad was a forest ranger, and his brother was too. They'd both been working in the park services for a long time. I mean, literally more than I'd been alive at the time between them each. So, they were very experienced with the unknown or strange experiences. Now, my dad didn't really believe in ghosts or anything. My mum did a lot more, but for some reason my dad just wouldn't believe her. I was kind of on the fence because my mum would tell me these stories about how she used to work and there would be ghosts and things that would open the doors when she was a little bit younger. But I didn't really believe it, to be honest, but who knows? I grew up reading ghost stories in books, so I had a tendency towards it being true. Now, we went out on one particular adventure like normal, and we decided to go further than where we usually would. Now, we want to go into the unknown of it because, of course it's nice doing the things you know, but it's better when things are unknown. As we head out, the trees are absolutely beautiful. At the time they seemed giant because I was quite small, but honestly, even if I was there today, they would seem really big. They were very thick too, and there wasn't much space in between the trees, making walking quite difficult at times. When you're into the more dense parts of the forest, you'd really struggle to not move left or right within a second to not walk into another tree. There were some very beautiful red leaves on the floor too, which I think made it very scenic. It was nice and humid too, which actually created a problem where there were mosquitoes and whatnot out, but it didn't really bother me at the time. Now, during this particular adventure, we have a really good time and eventually decide to stop. Just as we do so, my dad says, "Hey, do you recognise that path?" I say no, and my dad says, "I've never seen this before, let's go and explore it." And we can see some stone path that seems to lead up continuously. Now, we can't actually see where this goes to because of the thick trees and the bending nature of the path, but it seems really weird. My dad says this seems like it's a really old design and it shouldn't really be here. We think maybe it's some kind of ruins, but to where? We continue on the path and it actually hurts my feet because I'm used to walking on the soft ground and not this. Now, the actual brickwork, or stone should I say, only rise by about 6 inches to 8, so the steps aren't very deep, but I realise I get extremely tired on this walk. Now, we continue doing so and my dad makes us stop for a minute. We turn back and we can literally see just about where we've come from. We look ahead and it looks almost exactly the same. What I'm trying to say is that we don't know exactly where we're going, and my dad isn't too sure where he's come from, but we have camping equipment which my dad always carries in case of emergencies, so we can put a tent up if we need and find our way back. The issue with this one particular situation is that my dad didn't bring any communication equipment, and this is back in the day, so you don't really have phones and things with you. I would definitely have brought one, but I wouldn't have needed it because the nature was so beautiful. As I'm walking, I realise that another hiker is just off to the left of us. He's wearing a big white robe, which I think is a little bit weird, and I mention it to my dad, but he says, yeah, we're probably near some kind of monument or old house that people are looking at. I think it's a little bit odd because the person's walking on their own and they seem to be following us. They don't seem too weird. They seem maybe 5 or 8 or 6, so they're not very big, but they're definitely following parallel to us. Now, as we're walking, we realise soon that the steps have disappeared and we're no longer on a path. Just as I mentioned this to my dad, he says, "That's funny because I've just realised I can't see them anywhere." We turn around and look in all directions, and there's pretty much no evidence of any kind of man-made thing being out here, which is pretty strange because my feet are still hurting from the stones. Nonetheless, we continue on. The wood's actually changed now and there's more moss everywhere and it's actually a little bit slippery. My dad says it's strange because he's never seen the terrain change like this. He said it's almost like we've stepped back in time or something, and this is how it would have looked many years ago when the atmosphere was different slightly. I'm pretty annoyed now because my lovely white and grey shoes are looking a weird green colour and are somewhat grass stained by the moss. I don't know how else to describe it, but you know when you get a stain on your shoes that you know for the life of you isn't going to come off. My dad doesn't seem worried at this point, but a little confused. I'm not really concerned, but I think it's strange that there's no sign of that other hiker. I go to mention it to my dad, but he says to be quiet and look. He says, "Look at that, it's beautiful, isn't it?" And we can see a very old Victorian era house just up ahead. It's literally in the dead centre of the woods, and it's beautiful, and there seems to be people inside of it. I asked my dad if we can explore it. He says, "I'm not sure if we should because I think there's people that actually live there. I don't think they'll have much of a problem with us going in there. Maybe we should." Just as we've stopped to think about what's happening, I get overcome with the sense that somebody's been watching me. I turn to my left and just in the corner of my peripheral vision, I can see a white thing again. I suddenly realise that it's a hiker that's appeared again, but upon a closer inspection, I can see that their clothes don't really make sense to the environment. It almost looks as though they're wearing clothes which are really old, actually matching those to the people in the house that we've just seen. My dad realises this too, and he actually looks quite worried. Now it's strange because in all the times I've known him, and from where he's worked as a forest ranger, I've never seen him look disturbed or unsettled while being in the woods, so it kind of worries me a bit. My dad then calls out to this person or thing, but it just continues walking. It's almost like it doesn't know that we're there, but it's following virtually parallel to us. The silence that has gone over me and my dad and this thing is somewhat overwhelming when it's interrupted by the sounds of a horse, and I kid you not, a person riding a horse comes straight past us, literally 6 feet away, just dodging in and out of the trees. Again, whatever this person is doing out there doesn't make sense to the environment. Their clothes again are very outdated like the people around us. My dad then grabs my arm and says, "We've got to head back now." I look over my shoulder briefly and I can't figure out where the horseman's gone. But even worse, the whole house is gone. I say, Dad, do you see this?" He says, "Look, just go." And we start jogging now. Now my heart was racing because I've never seen my dad look so worried or in fear before. We continue going relatively quickly but have to stop a bit because the terrain's difficult with the moss. I look behind me and I can't see any other signs of any people, any signs of any buildings being there whatsoever, which is unbelievable because I kid you not, minutes before there was a whole house there with people and my dad saw it as well as me. We keep on running through the forest and we eventually make it back to the normal part, roughly where we started. What makes this really strange is the entire path that we'd seen before is no longer there. The very thing that made my feet hurt doesn't seem to exist anymore, and the air just feels different. I don't know how to describe it. My dad says we need to get home quickly, and eventually we make it back to our home. I start telling my mom about what happened and she says that's really strange. She tells us that maybe we've had some kind of time warp and it's a known thing where people seem to touch or go somewhere and they suddenly are thrown back into time. Some kind of time loop, I don't know how to describe it. Now at the time, I desperately wanted to tell all my friends and family, but my dad quickly stops me on my mom. My mom's worried that my dad's not going to be able to get work if this is reported, but upon further investigation, there used to be an ancient settlement in this part of the woods, and the houses would match up perfectly with the one that we had seen. Now I don't want to say it was paranormal or some kind of ghostly activity, but I have no idea what it was. It was literally like we'd stepped back in time, and we were watching something that we couldn't be a part of, and the things we were watching had no idea that we were there. Now I'm an avid hiker who enjoyed nothing more than camping in the great outdoors or scenic walks through the wilderness. I did have one experience, however, that really changed my views on things while doing so. It was during the springtime that I went solo camping and hiking. Now I live near a beautiful national park that had lots of forest rangers in the area, so help was always just a call away if you really needed it, so I never felt too bad being there. So I set out on my trek to find a good camping spot and it was absolutely beautiful. What I really liked about this walk is that you're very isolated out there, but like I said, never too far from danger. I love being at one with the nature and really felt peace in doing so. I remembered walking on the trail and thinking how beautiful nature is and almost like we don't deserve this. The trees were really pretty there with moss on it, and there was lots of different kinds of trees. Now for the first part of my hike, everything's going brilliantly. The scenery eventually changes and I see a small stream just ahead of me and large hills or mountains, I'm not sure what you'd call them, off in the distance. There's beautiful red brush on either side of where I was walking, and I really think this is perfect and how lucky I am to be able to enjoy this. Now you have to be careful while walking because there are wild animals like anywhere, but you have to remember that this is their home, not yours, and you're just a visitor. As I'm walking, I see a big blue tent to the left of me. It's a strange colour, almost like a sky blue one, and it doesn't really look in place if that makes sense. It's literally next to the path too. I can also see a fire pit just up to the right side of where I am, but I don't think too much of it. I do see some strange sticks up ahead that actually look like bones, but upon closer inspection though, I realise that these are literally just sticks, so I'm not really worried, and I continue onwards. As I continue making my way down, I can see a really beautiful lake ahead of me, and there seems to be somebody fishing just off in the distance. I sit down for a moment on one of the rocks that actually overlooks a beautiful lake, and I think how nice this is. I sit here for a while and suddenly hear a whistling sound. It's definitely coming from the person over by the lake, and I'm not sure whether it's to me or not, but it's enough to unsettle me and I continue onwards. It's starting to get a little bit dark now, but I can still see pretty well around me. I just admire how pretty the trees are because there's green, red and yellow ones all around me. I decide I should at least get away from this person's camping spot. As I do so, I notice an ancient grave marking to my left. It's made out of sticks and has probably been there for a long time, but I think this is really strange. I've never really seen anything like it before. I stop again on another side of the lake now. I'm thinking of how beautiful it is here, and I can actually see snow-covered hilltops or mountains in the distance slightly. I'm met once again by the whistling sound, which I think's really odd. I've now decided that I actually want to go further before I set up camp because I need to get away from whoever these people are. I'm not sure whether it's the same person doing this, but I can't be sure, so I'm always going to be cautious, especially where I'm on my own in this situation. I eventually come across a beautiful site and set up for the night. I make a very small fire, eat my food and lay back reading a book. I'm suddenly hear a loud bang sound next to where I am. It's hard to describe, but it's almost like somebody's threw something that shattered. I look outside and, to my surprise, there's broken glass all around. I get really angry and scream, "Hey, who the hell did that?" I look around and I can't see anyone. This is a really bizarre moment for me. I'm too tired to actually change my camping location and I ended up falling asleep exactly where I was, which I now realise is pretty stupid in hindsight. But strangely enough, when I woke up the glass was actually missing from where I was. I'd actually slept in for too long now, and I was actually a little bit annoyed at myself for doing so. I decided not to worry, and just continue on my hike. I don't want to let some idiot ruin this for me because it's so beautiful. I continue on my hike like normal and I come across a small bridge, and I stop to appreciate how beautiful the stream is running next to it over some rocks. As I do so, I hear something fall from a tree. I think this is really strange because I haven't heard any animals at this point, and it was very close to me. I stop again and a rock actually hits me. Now I look up quickly and laugh thinking, oh, the squirrels are doing stuff to me and don't want me here. But I get a feeling I should continue on, and I continue down the opposite direction that I've come from. I decide that I need to get to an area closer to civilizations or at least a ranger station in case I'm in trouble. Now I do know roughly where I'm going, so I'm not too scared, but on the walk down I have to be careful because there's lots of trees that have fallen all around me. Now it gets to that time again where I have to settle in for the night. Now this particular night was much more eventful than the other ones I've been in, especially any other time camping. Let me explain. The exact same thing happens again. I'm reading a book and I hear a strange sound around me. It unsettles me and I decide to get out and see what it is, thinking maybe there's a dog or something outside, but I don't see anything. I look around in all directions and I can just about make out some kind of orange thing in the distance. Now, I don't know how to describe it other than one of those chemical or hazmat suits, but without the big glass or plastic bit on the front. It's almost like the kind of stuff you'd wear skiing, but not, if that makes sense. I wasn't really close enough to know exactly what these are, but I realise there's multiple people standing in very similar outfits. Thinking my mind's playing tricks on me, I convince myself this can't be anything that I'm actually seeing and go back to sleep again. When I wake up the following day, there's strange markings around my tent. Nothing too worrying, but just really weird things like stones moved around and a small cross made out of sticks. Okay, this is too much for even me to handle. I decide that I should start heading back now. Only problem is the quickest way to get back is through an even longer hike, but eventually it becomes a shortcut. I decide this is a better option as I hopefully won't encounter more of these people, and I considered radioing it in to the rangers or trying to contact them, but I think, what if this is just my mind playing tricks on me? So I continue walking after packing up my things. Now the trees again are very beautiful. In this part, you can see very clearly through them, which actually makes me feel more comfortable. If that makes sense, like there's lots of trees but you can see through them and there's lots of light. But it kind of does that flashing shadowy thing, which is a little bit annoying, but I've got bigger fish to fry at this point. The path now is more of an asphalt or gravel. I don't really know how to describe it, but it's much better than where I was. I still don't see any signs of life though, which I think is pretty strange. I get to about 10 miles out from where I need to be, but night's setting in and I'm getting cold, so I set up my camp once again. This time, I decide to leave some of the leaves and whatnot to at least hide my shelter. And this probably took a good 40 minutes to do, but really, I hid this well. Standing back, I actually lost my tent a few times and I couldn't figure out exactly where I was. Anyway, I'd eventually go back into my tent and settle in for the night. And I can tell you it was a cold one today. It's strange because the other days haven't been cold like this, but I think maybe it's just because where I've had to camouflage my shelter it's more cold. I don't know, I'm pretty confused. Now this time when I go to sleep, I'm extremely vigilant, very paranoid that somebody or something might be outside waiting for me. I listen and listen and listen, convinced that there's going to be something out there, but I don't hear anything, and I eventually fall asleep. I remembered waking up feeling like I'd slept for an exceptionally long time. I'm thinking maybe I was so tired that I'd hallucinated all of the other things, and that this is what I needed. However, when I opened my eyes, it was a different story. Let me explain. When I woke up, I could see lots of my things, like clothes and whatever I left outside the tent had been burnt. Now it's strange because this completely contradicted the beautiful environment that I was in, but Lord have mercy did it scare me. What's more is there was more strange markings into the ground. They normally had crosses or stars, and some of them appeared to be in some kind of red paint, or blood. Looking back on it now, I'm certain this was blood, but I just didn't want to accept it because I was quite scared at the time. All I knew is this looked extremely weird and should not have been here. And who the hell had burnt my stuff? It seemed odd too because when I looked around, I realised that nobody was here but me. And I decided to investigate further, actually getting angry. Why has somebody burnt all of my freaking stuff? I had an expensive camera too that was now gone. I knew I should have slept with it. But the thing that I couldn't understand was how did anybody know where I was? I could not have hid the shelter better. It was next to a large collapsed tree too, and honestly I think even animals would have struggled to find this, but what's that stench? There's a smell that I just can't seem to shake. It smells absolutely disgusting. I look around trying to find the source of it and I can't find anything. I realise there's no point taking my tent now because, well, it's covered in leaves and things that are a little bit dirty and it was a cheap one anyway, but I can't figure out the smell. I then decide to look on the opposite side of the large tree that I put my tent up against, and then I see it. An animal carcass which is disfigured to the point I can't figure out what this is. It looks like an animal's had its way with it and absolutely destroyed it, but it's perked up onto a cross made out of sticks. So 1, this is no animal, and 2, who or whatever done this is absolutely insane. I lose my breath for a second and the next thing I know, I'm in full sprint mode trying to cover the 10 miles as quick as possible. I leave literally everything there. I walk past some joggers who must think what's wrong with me as I get closer to where the car park is. I eventually made it over there, then immediately drive to the nearest ranger station. I don't know who or what done this, but clearly they can do lots of harm. But how the hell did they find me? How long and how close must they have been following me for if they could see exactly where I went, figure out I camouflaged my tent, and then did God knows what outside? I quickly report it to the ranger, and this is then passed on and they say that I can come back in a couple of weeks and they're going to investigate. They tell me that they think it's probably some cultists because they've had strange activity out there before and people doing weird things but they just can't seem to find them, saying I'm extremely lucky based on what they've heard about things that happened before, but they wouldn't tell me anything else about it, saying come back and we'll let you know what happened, leave it to us. Well, I hate to say this, but I never had the nerve to go back there and find out. I don't know whether it's some kind of natural thing that my brain was doing to try and protect me or whatever, but I just couldn't face it. I never went camping again after that, alone or in groups. You can imagine why. I struggle sometimes when I fall asleep if I hear noises now. I think I might have some minor PTSD from it, because every time there's a sound when I'm sleeping that makes me jump, I think things are about to go south really quickly, and I think I'm being followed and I'm about to be attacked. So last week, me and my friend went camping together for the first time and something happened. When we got to the site, there was one other person there, a young, early 20s woman named Joey. She introduced herself and said she knew the woods like the back of her hand and offered to show us around. We accepted and off she went, showing us some of the trails and the best views, and was very sweet. She even joined us at our fire at night and talked about how she grew up camping with her dad, and around 12 she left and went to bed. When we woke up, I mentioned how nice Joey had been to my friend, but she had no idea who I was talking about. According to her, we're the only ones there, and we had found the spot by ourselves, and we had gone to bed much earlier. Over the next few days I kept mentioning it, but she's adamant there was no Joey ever. We left after 4 days and have talked about it since, but she still doesn't remember, despite having very clear memories of the whole day with Joey. I even checked the pictures I took, no Joey. Not even someone who looks like her. What happened? So this encounter happened many years ago when I was very young. It was in 2001 or 2, and I was 11 or 12 at the time. My uncle was interested in purchasing some land near Red Oak, Oklahoma. I don't know exactly where, but it was several acres in very remote wilderness. My father, mother and myself decided to accompany him one Saturday and scope out the property. From our home, it was a little more than a 3-hour drive, but we all loved riding in the car, so while it was not going to be the most eventful road trip ever, it was nice to get out of the house. Upon arrival, I remembered being very underwhelmed by this. No houses anywhere near, and hardly even signs of life, apart from birds, and the wooded area wasn't exactly what I'd call picturesque. Still, we park our car off the road and go to explore a little deeper into the woods. My uncle was talking about buying the land for hunting, not really my cup of tea. As we walk through the woods, it's a really nice day, but something feels weird. Everyone in our group remarked about the weird feeling, but Dad and Uncle laughed it off. My mum had goosebumps and kept looking over her shoulder, which makes me on edge. She was very insistent that it's weird and she wanted to leave, saying it felt like she's being watched. After a bit of hiking, I noticed that there's a small red building. I've seen bigger storage sheds in the shrubs, but it looked very well built. My uncle said there was nothing about it on the listing, so we went to peek inside and the doors open. And inside there were open cans of food, a ratty blanket on the floor, and it stunk like nothing I've ever smelt before. Following the discovery, we all agreed it would be best to get back into the car, and if there was something crazy in the woods, then we wouldn't be there to find him, whoever it was. Only issue, we had walked pretty far into the woods, and now weren't exactly sure which direction was correct. The eerie feeling really ramped up and we were all scared. We ended up trekking another mile before we finally found the road, but when we were further down from the road where we parked our car, we weren't really sure exactly where we were, but at least we could just follow the road. Walking along the road, we come across a truly unsettling sight. Right in the middle of the asphalt was a dark grey cat on fire. I have no idea why a cat was there or how that came to be. but obviously we're really confused and there's no one in sight. We ran over the rest of the way to the car, and there was a huge scratch in the paint all the way down the side. Thankfully, that was the only damage, and my dad was able to start it without any trouble, and we drive as fast as we possibly can. My heart is jumping as I even recount this story. I was hunting for black bear one day. Bloody hell. Back in the early 2000s. The area I was hunting in was northern Clinton County. My ex-brother-in-law and I enjoyed the area and spent many a season scouting and hunting these lands. This part of the county is filled with long hollows, steep inclines and hard to access trails. We both like to do our thing and hunt separate terrains. I would often drive down into the hollows while he looked around the ridgelines hoping to get a shot at whatever I pushed over the top. We both carried pretty bumped up two-way radios to keep a general idea of where we are, although often the terrain makes it difficult to get a good reception. This was a typical PA, bear season. It was on the Wednesday of the season, third and last day of the brief season it was back then. The woods were quiet with no distant whooping or yodeling of various opening day camps. Driving through the woods, the weather was cold, grey and windy when we separate to begin our hunt, and continue throughout the day. I spent the day still hunting down this long hollow south of a little town in central Clinton County, with the idea of meeting my brother-in-law at the top of the ridge at the agreed time of 4 p.m, giving us plenty of time to hike through together the last few miles back to his truck. After hunting all day, I found an old game trail that appeared to meander its way up the ridge down towards where he knew I'd be waiting. After close to an hour, maybe around 3:30, I made my way 2/3 over the top, stopping often, securing the slope of that jet black fur of a roaming bear. Along the trail, I come upon a used fire ring, and I mean long ago. It was very rudimentary in its build and appearance, having only been used once. The ring's rocks were covered in lint and only had the faintest traces of black from a long time ago. I found it odd that a fire ring would be here, considering the steepness of the slope, but it was a very small, somewhat levelled ridge. Then I figured I would sit and eat the rest of my pack food and sit still, hoping to catch a final chance to see a bear. All the while it felt odd, somewhat unwelcoming, like I shouldn't have been there, almost like I was at a forbidden interloper on somebody's valued spot. I sat for maybe 20 minutes and thought it was time to continue the trek upwards to my bud. As I stood up, I slung my backpack on and reached down to sling my rifle on my shoulder. As I stood up, I hear my name called out very loudly. It really didn't sound like it was behind me, rather all around in my head. Just as I turned around, my rifle was slapped off my shoulder and I felt force, and something slapped a big bit of wood across the stock. I quickly managed to save my gun from dashing into the rocks at my feet. I grabbed it in the nick of time before turning around, and I'm ready to see who or what it was. There's nobody there though, and there's absolutely no way it could have been my brother-in-law. No one was there. It's crazy because if anybody rushed off, I would have definitely seen them and definitely heard them. I had a sick feeling in my stomach, chills run throughout my body. I muttered a Hail Mary a few times and speed up to the top of the ridge, meeting my buddy, and we quietly hike our way out of the woods to his truck, in the dark spread of evening. This has bothered me for years now, and I have no idea what happened that day. I never went back to that area of woods too. My brother has a winter job closing parks. He drives around in a country vehicle and makes sure no one is in the park before closing the gates. He does this from about 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. and it's pretty dark out. The other day he was closing one of the parks when he saw a man hopping through the woods. The man then saw him and crouched down and just watches my brother. Another time, my brother left and went to another park where he found a coyote completely frozen still as though it was still alive. I was hiking in Woodland National Forest on a trail that I'm very familiar with. I had my 2 dogs with me, a hound and a Labrador. We had just got off a really steep hill and I sat down for a rest. My dogs are usually cruising around, sniffing out little critters and enjoying themselves. Suddenly, one of the dogs starts growling and staring down the trail where we had just come from. Just like that, they both get up next to me and start growling, staring down the trail, then running. Coming back though. It's not a particularly bushy area, so I can see pretty far but don't see anything, but the dogs are convinced something's there, and I believe them. Maybe a cougar? After a while they calmed down, and we kept going and looped back on another trail. I had a pocket knife with me that I kept for the remainder of the journey and kept looking back. We eventually get back okay, but since then they've never acted like it, and I have no idea what it was to this day. I've been backpacking and camping mostly solo as an adult for the majority of my life. I'm cautious about my surroundings, and I listen carefully when out. I try to remain an observer and move through the land with little impact. I'm also very interested in mysterious and obscure, cryptids or just things that are unknown. Now, this is something that I've always been interested in, to be honest. Now, I've read most of the missing 411 cases, and I am a serious devotee of true crime, all the morbid and curious things I can find, anything strange that will fire the imagination, truthfully. Now there have been occasions where I felt slightly uncomfortable or even watched, when I've been out in the woods, but mostly I've chalked it up to me just being out there on my own really, and maybe just being alert. My inherent skepticism makes me less susceptible to encounters with other things that I've experienced. I look for the logical explanation first. I never encountered anything truly off or really deranged people out in the forest, but I do consider the biggest threat to be the human animal. A few years ago, I set out to camp near an old forest growth in North Georgia. Most of my old growth here is gone, but there are places that haven't been logged, and if you get the chance to visit one, wherever you live, I'd suggest it. It's beautiful, very scenic, and alive in a way that's hard to describe. Now this particular forest was one of the hemlock and poplar, and the trees there are massive. I had a guidebook that gave me directions out into the sticks, following little country roads that eventually turned into gravel, after a long drive into a national forest park where I lived near the trail, which was unmaintained, meaning it wasn't very popular or highly travelled. I hiked out through the woods to where the trail eventually kind of stops. There was very little undergrowth. I spent the afternoon just exploring it, looking at the trees and enjoying the calm. I eventually made my way down to a creek and crossed over to it to an open field that formed a sort of bowl in the land with hills and ridges on all sides. The fact that there was a field means that there had, I guessed at one point, been people living in that area, but I don't really see anything when I get there indicating there's settlements or whatnot. I set up my tent and made some food. It was late when I decided to have a little smoke and lay out in the field in front of my tent and look at the stars before bed. There was little to no light pollution, and I always relished the opportunity to enjoy looking at the stars. As I lay there, I began hearing a loud knocking sound coming up from the ridge where I'd been earlier in the day, maybe 1,000 yards away. There's actually 3 knocks, which are followed by a long pause. 3 more than a repeat. When I say knocks, I mean very loud noises like 2 logs or trees being hit together, loud enough to really unsettle me and feel the reverberation in the bowl I was eating out of. loud enough that you can feel it almost. I could pinpoint where the sound was coming from, but it was right in the forest and it's dark out now. I thought that it had been a person making the noise because what else would make such a rhythmic sound? It was extremely loud and would have been considerably difficult to make this much noise. I'd also seen no one else during the day in that direction too, or anyone else at all. Eventually the sound stopped and I went to bed, feeling like I'd heard something I wasn't supposed to hear, or maybe I heard something specifically which was meant for me to hear it. Now I've told my friends about this experience and they either say that it was for sure a Sasquatch or I had a close encounter with a strange person, but why would a person be out in the woods so late at night smashing logs together so loud? Hello everyone, I hope you're doing great today and I hope you'll enjoy these stories. I actually really enjoyed the different variety of stories that I included in this video and I hope you will do too. Make sure you check out my Patreon for early access in the description below and my podcast in the description too. I also have an Instagram I use called Insomniac Horror, so if you want to see some of what I'm up to then check that out. So before the video starts I have a quick message. So if you want to go straight to the stories, then there's timestamps in the description below. I think if you're struggling with your anxiety or anything else, it's very important to have dedicated you days. These are days where you don't put pressure on yourself to do anything and you just focus on the things that you enjoy. Because sometimes it's easy to get caught up in the constant cycle of trying to do things. And I find sometimes this is more mental than physical because you never really give yourself a psychological break from things. And this can quite easily make everything else worse for you. So there's a kind of thinking called rumination, which is where you almost stay stuck in a constant cycle of thinking and it can spiral downwards. And sometimes it's just from not giving yourself a break from your thoughts and letting yourself take the pressure off. So I really recommend people try it. Especially if you have quite a high work drive, you might never schedule these days, but honestly, the days where you don't do things are just as important as the ones where you do. So maybe give it a try. I hope that can help someone. So I hope everybody's doing great and enjoyed these stories. I'll speak to you all soon. I'm somebody who's very lucky to live next to nature. I live with the nice rocks and trees, so I think I'm very fortunate to have this. Now, I wouldn't describe myself as an adventurer really, just somebody who likes to go out and do things that are more brave, I guess, is a better way to put it. Now, most of my life I'd like to go through forest walks on my own. Sometimes I do it with a friend, but not that often. I don't know why, I just almost felt like the experience would be tainted. Now, I realised one day that I wish the case was different. And after that, I did actually start going out with my brother a lot more. Let me explain. So, I love the summer walks more than anything, and on one particular summer, I was enjoying my time as usual. I'd been to a store to go and get a soda, and I was just slowly drinking this. At the time, I just bought some cheap grey running shoes, and I would usually wear these for my walks. That's because, of course, the rocks are going to mess up all of your shoes, so what's the point of wearing really nice ones that you know are going to get smashed up? I also have my trusty headphones with me. Now this was a few years ago when you could actually plug in your headphones, and I had these massive ones I got on discount, but they're actually really good. So I'm doing my usual, listening to music that doesn't match the environment at all, but enjoying my walk. Now, for the first part of my walk, I don't actually see anyone. I walk past an old bunker that's been there for a long time and wonder if anyone's actually in there or not. Apparently people used to go into these things, but they had to concrete around it to stop them. I don't know what went on in them, but I always found them interesting. I walked over the thing and I hear a strange clicking sound. I realise it's probably what I'm standing on, so I quickly move down and try and get out of the way. I continue on my walk like normal, actually going further than my normal route. I ended up taking a call off of my friend and we were just talking for what felt like hours, what was only 40 minutes. However, it was enough time for me to get a little bit lost. I wasn't too worried though. I could see up ahead there was some kind of railroad track, one that surprisingly I hadn't seen before, and it had been abandoned long ago. I decided to continue up here and see what it's all about. I also think that A, I can probably figure out my way back from here, and B, it must lead to civilization at least. As I'm walking, I realise the sticks look a bit different off the side of the gravel road. I then realise that there's quite a lot of animal bones around here. It's strange because this isn't something that I really noticed before, and there really seems to be a lot of them. I was actually a little bit worried, but more curious than anything. Now I would have had to have said that these have been here for a long time, and they're bone dry by now. They all seem to lead up to the rail tunnel. Now, I'm met with a dilemma. I can explore the dark tunnel on my own with my phone torch, which has about 40% left, or I can just turn back the opposite way. I'm pretty sure I know how to get back now, and I choose the first option, which I realised later was probably stupid because I was on my own, but honestly, to me, I'm just happy because I'm going on an adventure. Now, as I'm walking, it becomes apparent there's lots and lots of sticks along the road. I don't really pay much attention to it and I continue walking. Now, as I'm walking, something suddenly snaps under my feet and I decide to look down to figure out what this is. It then dawns on me. This thing below my feet is another bone. There are lots of bones up here. In fact, there's too many to be honest to be comfortable with. I think this is a little bit strange and click. I can hear the clicking sound once more. I realise something's off now, but I just think I'm too strong to take on anything stupidly in my head. I'm convinced if it's a small animal I can just kick it away, which is funny now in hindsight. So I continue on, now realising that the bones are increasing the closer I get to the mouth of this tunnel. No sign of trains either. I think this was a disused one from maybe 70 or 80 years ago, but I'm not thinking much of it. Now I eventually make it to the front of where the train tracks are leading. Now I can see absolutely nothing, but I stupidly decide to press on. Now I thought I'd have a better chance of using my night eyes, at least if anything happens, so I decide not to use my phone flashlight. I realise now that they must have blocked off the other side of the tunnel, or more likely it's collapsed. I walk into the darkness for about 20 seconds and there's no more clicking sounds to make me paranoid. I think this is a little bit bizarre because I'd almost grown used to a strange clicking sound every so often, and I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, or maybe I had some problem with my ears. Now, before I actually got very unwell with an ear infection and I didn't want to experience it again, so I was actually quite annoyed at the time. I decide to turn on my flashlight quickly because I can hear water dripping ahead of me. I then realise that part of this is actually flooded. Just as I stand there, I can see some dark, shadowy figure moving to my side. Almost instinctively, I turn on my flashlight and realise it's my reflection. I laugh, and I hear my laugh echo for what seems impossibly long. It felt like I was standing in front of infinity mirrors in a lake. It's hard to describe, but it was a strange feeling. I realise that it's a rusted out pipe that's actually done this. And it looks like there's almost a mine to the side of me, but this is underwater now, so I don't bother going there. I then hear crunch, crunch, crunch to my right. I turn my flashlight over to that direction and I can see a mouse running across some more bones. It turns out there's a lot of these things. Now I'm a little bit worried. It dawns on me that I'm probably standing just in the home of some hungry mountain lions. Or maybe not. Maybe the real monsters here are people I don't know. Or maybe there was some kind of disaster that happened that I don't know about and was covered up. I just realised that it's time for me to leave. Especially too, who knows, what if I take a step forward and I cut my foot open on the water? Then I'm in big trouble. And my parents would kill me when I come back if they heard what I'd done. I was also a little bit frustrated now because I stepped in a big puddle and ruined my trainers. Another strange thing is I realised how bad it smells in here. I look down at my phone and I've got 32% battery now. I'm actually quite annoyed. Not because I don't have enough battery for the flashlight, but it's going to be really boring if I have to go back on my own and I haven't even got music at least. Now, I get to the very opening of this tunnel and just stop for a minute to look around. That's when I notice it. That distinctive clicking sound that I can hear again. I can't figure out exactly what it is, and I'm met with some kind of movement in front of me. I realise now that I need to get to some kind of high ground, just in case I have to try and climb up a tree or just anything in case it's an animal. I'm pretty convinced it's a mountain lion that's decided it wants to hunt me and take me into the tunnel. I don't actually have any way to defend myself, and I realise that I'm probably going to have to run for my life and it might be futile. I quickly climb up to the top and realise that it's not a mountain lion. I realise that standing just off the distance to me there's someone staring at me. I can just about make out what they are, but they're hidden behind a tree to be definite. Okay, this is pretty weird, because I'm pretty sure the clicking sound's now coming from the direction of that figure. Now, it dawns on me, whatever this thing is has probably been watching me go into the cave and has actually waited for me to come out again. So as you can imagine, there's lots going on in my head right now, but common sense prevails and says I need to get out of here. But I remembered what I'd seen on the news before about how that it's important if you think you're being stalked by someone to just not act like a victim, just confidently walk on your way. Plus, I don't know where I'm going. I quickly look down the hill and wonder whether I should try and come out to the other side and continue following the train tracks. Click. No time to think, I hear the clicking sound again. I realise I'm going to have to go all the way around this thing and try and make it back to civilization. I decide to pick up a quick jogger's walk pace, if that makes sense. Just under the pace of jogging, but walking very quickly. I quickly put on my headphones, but not to play music. For once, common sense had prevailed. I do this so I can pretend I'm listening to music, but secretly spy on this person. I decide to look at my phone for the time, then decide to turn around and continue onwards. Now, it's still pretty bright and sunny out, but nightfall's not too far away. I continue walking to the side of where I've come from. Actually very disorientated in truth, but I have a mental map. Now my heart keeps beating and beating, and I actually feel my arms going stiff because of the blood flowing through them. I actually can't keep track of this person, and I can't really make out who they are or what they're doing. I suddenly hear more movement just behind me. I quickly glance around, just in time to see something or someone dart behind a tree, and then click. I can see a large black circle staring at me. I don't know what this is. I've heard stories about wendigos, and I really don't know whether my mind's absolutely exhausted from the whole trek, or if I'm actually seeing this thing. Then I realise this is a camera. This person has been taking pictures of me literally all day, and the camera's staring right at me. Click, click. I feel like I've been captured by something that should never have caught me. I don't bother being cautious anymore. I just turn around and sprint for about 2 minutes. Now this absolutely exhausts me because stupidly I don't have any water with me. My vision actually starts to go quite bad now, and I can see black patches all around my vision. This is something I get when I'm exhausted and very dehydrated, and sometimes I can actually pass out from it. There's no time for me to pass out because I know I'm going to end up in that cave again. I keep on walking, and eventually I put some distance behind myself and this person. I realise that they must have been wearing camouflage because it's so difficult to see them, and it's not dark enough that I shouldn't be able to. Now the camera seems to be quite a good one too, which is something that I've realised now. It's almost like this person is professional at whatever they're doing. They seem to know the area far better than I did too. The sky has now gone quite a nice colour as the sun is setting, and I'm actually feeling quite cold. All I have on is shorts and a sports t-shirt. I go for my phone, but it's completely dead now. I stupidly take off my headphones, which reveals that of course I'm fully aware of what's happening around me. I eventually have no sign of this person following me with the camera. I continue down a hill and finally I can see where civilization should be. I make as much an effort as possible to act confident, but it must have looked stupid. It must have looked like a drunk person trying to imitate a confident walk because I'm shaking a little bit. I can't tell whether it's from the fear or fatigue, but I notice that something's off with me. I eventually make it down back to where civilization is, and I have a quick look around me, and I can't see anything. There's literally no signs of this figure or person. I have realised too that I've also lost my card, so I can't actually get on the bus and I have to walk all the way home. I'm just very glad to be back with civilization now. When I make it home, I decide not to tell anyone about my experience because I know they'll be worried. When I turn my phone on again, I had lots of missed calls. Not because people are worried about me, just because I was supposed to call my friend again, but of course I ran out of battery. I ended up completing the call, and I just forget about it for a while. Now this is until a few days later. My mum says, "How did you not see what happened on the news today? You always go out to that place." I say, "What are you talking about?" And my mum tells me, a person was kidnapped not far off where I always like to go walking, and how my mum's never gonna let me go out there again. I look, and to my horror, there's a report of somebody going completely missing that they're convinced has been kidnapped. They investigated the entire area but can't find anything, and I believe the investigation is still ongoing to this day. Now, I might be drawing too many things together, but I'm convinced that that person out there with the high-powered camera was actually stalking me and looking for an appropriate victim. I'm not sure whether it is because of my height or just because I was quick enough, but I'm pretty sure if I had stopped for too long in the inside of the tunnel opening, I'm certain that I would have been like some of them bones around. Now, I know that this isn't probably related and the bones were probably just there before, but my god, it's such a horrible, weird feeling for me. Ever since then, I constantly look around myself when I'm walking normally. It's something I didn't notice until I was with some of my friends and they said, "Hey, you always look like you're being chased." And I haven't told any of them the reason why I'm so scared sometimes for no reason. Now, I want to tell this story just as a warning to other people. It's cool to go off on little adventure type things on your own, but please don't be as stupid and as oblivious as I was. Not only did I not realise how much danger I was in, but I didn't even have water with me. I could have even passed out from dehydration, or easily cut myself in the cave and got really hurt, and nobody would be there to rescue me. So please take my story as some kind of wisdom for yourself. Be careful out there, because you never know what might happen. I live in a Nordic country, so my winters are pretty harsh. I was still an avid hiker though, and I loved to go out into the woods and actually enjoyed camping a lot. Now there's one specific area where the authorities overseeing it would always keep an eye on you in case anything went wrong, and it did for me one day. Now this is in October time, and there's quite a lot of snow everywhere. Now for the day in question, I was actually having a really good time. I was enjoying my hot chocolate and my dehydrated food. I was actually out here camping on my own, and it was almost a challenge for myself to see how well I could do. The snow had been relatively light throughout the day, so I wasn't too worried about it. I did hear a strange howling sound during my venture, but I didn't think much of this. I thought even if there are dangerous animals, with the stuff I have they should probably stay away. I was well prepared for any situation basically. Now my goal was to get to the top of a mountain ridge kind of thing. It's hard to describe, but the scenes from there would be absolutely beautiful. Now, I started to get very cold around midday. I wasn't close to any of the ranger stations or anything, so I wouldn't be able to stop now. I only had about 5 more days to do this, so I wanted to feel like I'd been successful. Now it was also very quiet, almost beautifully. I love it when it's snowing but it's still dead silent where you are. I think there's truly nothing like it for me. I grew up in this kind of environment too, so I was very at peace while I was there and never really worried about anything, to be honest. Now, it starts to become very cold towards the night time and the snow picks up very quickly. Now I'm actually annoyed that I can't even keep my hot chocolate warm that I've made. I had good supplies of fuel and food at this point, so again I wasn't too worried. Now one of the most important things is that you make sure you position your tent away from the direct incoming wind in terms of the door, because there's nothing worse than opening it and you get a huge wind gust and suddenly you're fighting off hypothermic temperatures, struggling to keep your tent warm. I realised quickly that I've set up my tent the wrong way, and I have to spend about another 35 minutes trying to reposition it on my own. As I'm doing this, I hear the howl of some kind of dog again. I think, oh great, I'm gonna have to fend off these guys on my own and put my tent up. I decide not to worry about it too much and realise that the hypothermic temperatures are my biggest danger now. I actually can't feel my hands and I worry maybe I'm going to have to put out an emergency call to get help. But eventually my experience kicks in and I manage to put the tent up pretty nicely. Now I'm actually having quite a good time once I get the tent up. I'm enjoying some of my dehydrated food again, which I've rehydrated with some of the snow around me. And I'm just writing in my journal like I always do. I'm actually reading a book about some of the great Arctic explorers from back in the day, and I actually really enjoy doing so. It's something that I've done previously before and I always found some peace in it for some reason. I always wanted to go to the great North or South Pole one day, but I'd have to be careful. It might be cold where I am, but I know in the South Pole it can get to -80 in the winter, which I think is absolutely insane. I eventually decide it's time for bed and eventually drift off to sleep. Now I'm woken up and disorientated. I can see someone pushing their hands into the side of the tent. I've wiped my eyes and realised that in fact it's a big lump of snow that's formed. I'm not scared because I was quite tired, but I think it's really odd. I quickly punch this off the side of the tent and quickly fall asleep again. Now when I'm awoken again, I feel some kind of weight on my legs and most of my body. I think, maybe I'm just cold, and I try and move my legs but I realise I can't. I then open my eyes and I realise I'm completely stuck. It then dawns on me, something's completely off here. I don't know what's happened in the time that I fell asleep to now. I think maybe there was some person out here who actually pushed a tent in on me and made it collapse. I suddenly snap into true consciousness and realise, God, the snow has made my tent collapse on me. I have virtually no way to move and no way to reach for help. My adrenaline fills my body as I realise that I'm now in a true life or death situation. I don't know how much snow is on me, but I know it's rising fast and that I'll quickly die if I can't resolve this. I tried to move for a good 3 minutes and literally can't do anything. I then stay still. I lay my head back a couple of inches that I can move it, and realise this might be it. I'm laying there and not really knowing what to do when I realise I have to fight this to get out back to safety again. I move my legs to no luck. I move my left arm and realise I can just about wiggle it around enough to start slowly making a clearing. It's hard to describe, but the tent has collapsed onto me, and the snow on the top half of my body is less than the snow on the bottom half. The biggest issue now again is just how cold it is. I scream out, but I don't get any reply. I continue moving my left arm until eventually it becomes clear. I move my left shoulder and eventually I can move my other arm too. I'm now working frantically against the clock as I realise that the snow's forming just as quick as I can clear it off. I eventually wiggle my legs around and become free in this sense too. I manage to eventually push myself free from the snow, but I realise there's no way I can get out of the tent because the door's actually under me. I do have a knife on me, but of course if I try and cut the tent open I won't have a way to stay warm. I don't have enough supplies on me to be able to afford to do something like that. I eventually flip the tent over and can just about open the tent door. I realise this thing's completely collapsed on me and I don't actually know where my supplies are now. I put my head out for a second and get a massive wind gust that knocks me back into the tent. I realise, great, now I'm gonna have to dig around in the snow to try and find my emergency communication equipment. I stupidly left it just outside of the tent and I'm convinced that the cold's gonna stop it from working. I have to move the entire tent with myself just to stay warm. And I think, God, I can't find anything. This is crazy. Why did I ever let this happen? I quickly get some of my hot water and throw it onto the ground to melt the snow, but I don't see anything. I now realise I've got two options to survive, and I can either stay put and hope I find my communication equipment, or try and make my way back down the way I've come. I decide that if I stay there, I'm probably going to be dead, and the tent's going to collapse again. I end up dragging the tent behind me with whatever equipment there is, and move slightly. It's almost impossible for me to stand, and I'm constantly being pushed back during this time. I've never experienced anything like it, even in all my time out there. I know I can make my way down from here, but it's going to be tricky. I look where I've come from, but I literally can't see more than a foot in front of me. It's like a whiteout. I have no way of getting to my communication equipment, so I just have to step down and slowly get off this thing with my equipment in my tent being dragged behind me. I do this for a good 20 minutes before I have to stop because it's just so cold. I realise then that I've barely made it anywhere. I realise there's a large tree near me and I quickly start digging. I'm frantically tunneling. Now I'm doing this so quick that I actually start sweating, which is very dangerous. There's not much time to worry about that now, as I quickly burrow under the tree. I eventually make a big enough clearing that I can actually put all my stuff here, then cover up the end of it with my equipment and my tent. I do so and grab my sleeping bag and blanket around me and light a candle underneath me. This is actually an emergency way to stay warm, which of course you have to be careful of the fumes and the fire risk, but I think it saved my life. I do this for a little while, but I'm hesitant to make a bigger fire because it might trap all of my oxygen and mean I suffocate under here because where I am in my tunnel. I know it's bad because I can't hear any of the animals outside. They've of course all took shelter and decided to get away from this, but not me. I'm stuck under here, not knowing what to do. Not really knowing what to do now, I frantically look for everything and try desperately to find any of my comms things. Unfortunately, I can't find anything, and I just lay my head back, not sure what to do. I just pray the storm can subside soon. I light another candle, having two going at the same time now, and I actually feel quite warm. I decide I have to drink and eat to try and keep my energy up. I just wait here and start reading, hoping the storm will pass. My head fell backwards and I fell asleep for a second before snapping into it again. Sleep is something that I can't afford to do now. Now after a good 2 hours of waiting, and through a few more candles, I quickly look outside, and thankfully, I can see a lot further ahead of myself now. I don't have to worry so much about going out, and I think I can wait here and run out of candles, or I can find the comms equipment. I can see where my original campsite was and where I'd struggled down, just because of my experience. Most of it's buried under the snow, but I decide to go for it. I quickly cover up where I've come from so it stays warm, and I very quickly crawl my way up to there. Now, it wasn't as bad as before, but it's still bad enough that I can't even stand up, and of course I'm at risk of sliding down this thing. I dig and dig away until eventually I find my comms equipment. I'm so happy that I scream out, but I suddenly snap into it and realise I have to get back under my tree and try and make an emergency call. Now at first when I tried using my equipment, it doesn't work and the battery's dead, but I knew another technique I could do where if I constantly rub the battery on my coat, it could charge it up. I do this for a good minute. I put the battery in, and I hear a sound. Click click. My comms equipment has come to life again, just about. I immediately make out an emergency distress call, and there's help coming and it shouldn't be too long. They say I should just go back to the tree and wait until they hear from me again, and that's exactly what I do. I quickly go back under my tree and spend the whole rest of the time trying to charge up my battery again. I decide I have to go out because there's no way they could see me because I'll be perfectly camouflaged. By now though, the storm has much passed and it's not too bad. I walk in small circles to stay warm for another 10 or 15 minutes until finally I can see some red coats appearing on the horizon. I scream out to them and they shout back. I fall to my knees and collapse with exhaustion. They come and rescued me, and I managed to get away with only minor frostbite. I'm so thankful to God to be alive, and honestly if I didn't have the experience that I did out there, I would never have made it back alive. I'm still someone who likes to go out camping, but never alone like I used to. I realise now how stupid it was, but I can't really blame myself too much. I done everything right. But that just goes to show you that you can never truly master the wilderness. The wilderness will always master you. You just have to work with it. And if the wilderness decides that it wants to give you a bad hand, then by God it's going to do so. And you have to pray that you can make it out of there alive. I'm just thankful for the services who managed to rescue me. They risked their life to save me and others, and I'll be forever grateful to them. Now I'm not a ranger, but I used to live in the outskirts of a national park in a cabin. It was a 4-mile drive from the main road just to get to the property and had no plumbing or power. This property was right next to where the park started. To call it the middle of nowhere is truly an understatement. My roommate at the time was interning with the park service, but he's a city kid. Every evening, at the dead of night, I had been hearing noises in the woods. Now it actually sounds like how somebody would walk in the jungle, how they have to stop every so often. Is it a pig, a cat, or just the wind? Now the cabin didn't have a lock-in door, and the owners didn't want me to install one, so I began sleeping in my car. The property's huge, and I'd parked my car over an acre away from the cabin when I heard something. I heard the footsteps again. I moved out. My roommate stayed sleeping without locking the door. Now it turned out he got robbed not once but twice after I moved out, so I firmly put in motion cameras, and there was a man walking with a long rifle who would set up in the bush to watch us. I'm a 44-year-old male. This took place when I was 18. I still can't drive down back roads. So I was driving in the deep south down a lovely stretch of road heading to Hattiesburg to see my family. I'm from Canada and only knew this way of getting there. So I'm currently in the middle of nowhere, Mississippi at 1 AM while driving. I can hear the sound of someone yelling. I know I shouldn't have, but I pulled over. I thought maybe someone needs help. I had a big mag light in my trunk too. I should point out that this car was my first car and it wasn't very good. I called out into the darkness saying, "Hello? Is someone in trouble?" I get no response, just an eerie silence. I heard something in the distance. It sounded like somebody trying to sneak around without detection. I heard a slight, somewhat distant snap of a twig, followed by the sound of a voice. "What are you all doing in my part of the woods? No one goes here." I nearly have a heart attack. I started to sweat from fear. Please don't hurt me. I just thought someone wanted help. Come here, son. I can't have anyone seeing what I'm doing. I then run around to the front of my car and hop in the driver's seat, mag light still in hand. I turned the key only for the car to sputter and die. Oh, come on, not now. I turned the key again, hearing the car choke to life. I put it in drive and floor it. The car was leaving a trail of pollution like the car out of Uncle Buck. I looked in the mirror to see my worst nightmare. My heart skipped a beat, and I see headlights coming up quick. My car can only go 80 flat out. I came up on a bend, giving my crappy handling car the fright of its life, and I have to slow down. I braked and feel a bump from behind. The vehicle effectively tailgated me. I can't make out the driver due to the headlights and height of the truck. We round the bend, and I put the pedal down all the way. I can hear the car's engine struggling to make up the revs now. Slowly the car crept up to 80. Now, it's literally just inches from my bumper, but I knew we're coming up to an intersection, so I decided to try and make the truck go. We got to the intersection and I fake a turn. It worked initially, but as I slowed down and sped up from the fake turn, the truck swerved violently and started following very close again. The car struggled up to 80 again. I looked in, and the headlights are blinding. I felt another big bump as the truck rammed me again. The car swerved slightly, but I corrected it with my adrenaline-fueled strength. I heard the truck rev up, readying for another ram. I swerved over to the opposite lane, nearly losing control, just as I saw a road coming off then. With the truck having fell so far back, I make my turn. I turned the car lights off and spun the car around, watching the road ahead. Sure enough, a big pickup truck roars past. I wait a good 30 minutes before continuing. I called the cops when I get to my family's home, but all they found was an abandoned home. Everything in the home was normal except one thing, a picture of my car. I've never been to a back road since. I saw what I think was the same truck a few weeks later in a gas station in Alabama. I brought a new car since then and only visit that part of my family every once in a while since this happened. So for some background, I live in New Hampshire, in the southern suburban area. When I was younger, and currently, I lived in a couple of places because of a divorce. I'll start off with Mum's house. There were woods that were behind my mum's house that we owned. We owned a pine-dominated acre, but the whole woods were about 20 acres. You could always see civilization from it, either the suburban houses row or a street on the other side that had no houses on the sides. The woods always felt very warm to me, and I really loved to be in them. So, it was basically like a third parent to me. However, on the other side of the street was another lot of forests, full of 10 to 20-year-old oaks and birches. Now one day when I was maybe 9 or 10, I was playing in the nice woods, and now I'd really explored the whole 20 acres to be honest, and decided to check out the other woods on the other side of the street. The road was flanked on both sides by forests, and there was a nursing home down the street. I crossed the street, and the moment I entered the forest, my mind was telling me get out. I had the sensation of being watched. However, I had always been curious, so I pushed deeper until I come to a circular thinner part of the forest, not a clearing. There was a pile of trash ahead of me, not drug paraphernalia, but old food and trash clothing. Now my inner voice was screaming, get out of there, get the hell out, so I ran back through the woods as fast as I can until I reached a road. I went back into the nice woods and I felt fine. About 4 or 5 years after, I was kind of bored with the woods behind my house and wanted to check out the forest again. I go back, now with a knife in the holster to explore. I had my hand on my knife the whole time. I had the being watched and get out feelings again. Now, I never found the thinned part, but found the shoes, dozens of old rotten shoes. There was also a camping stove and an old propane can, food trash and camping pot. I picked it up and took it home, since I needed a cooking pot for camping, and I still have it. The part that actually scared me though was the shoes, all kinds of them. Nice shoes, small shoes, female running shoes, baby shoes, at all varying ages and states of decay. I was freaked the hell out, but I kept pushing. I got to the 35th degree embankment, which I climbed and found a residential area above it. There was a thick fence with no gate, and the other houses had no gates at all. The trash and shoes were too deep in the forest to be thrown in by uncaring homeowners. I finally decided to leave. I was super scared by the time I got out of the forest, and now I was and still am a very emotionally stoic person. However, the worst experience that I had yet was at my dad's house. Well, this was more of this kind of neighborhood. It was a tightly packed neighborhood, and it was surrounded by a thin forest. Small forests of huge pines separating the houses. It was in a city, but every now and then I would see a moose or deer. So one day, I was walking my dog during dusk. It was almost total night and the streetlights were on. I got closer to a turn in my walking path with this pine and oak forest and thought I spotted something in the forest and freeze in fear. My gut wrenched in the most horrible, terrible feeling ever. It felt like I was just told the worst news of my life. It looked like a deer standing up. Not a Wendigo. It had a fat white belly and brown fur on its back, and it was staring at me. I originally just fixate on its belly, but then when I look up at its face, I couldn't make out much of it. I have good eyesight and should have been able to see it, but it was like my central vision was suddenly switching to peripheral. It just blended into the forest. I could see the body and not the head. Then it fell to the ground, gets on all fours, turned and ran into the direction of the fence. On the other side of the fence is a dump. The forest is only about 50 by 50 feet, and this thing must have jumped about 6 foot over the chain link fence to get out. My dog, a hound who is normally smelling the pizza or car 30 seconds before it arrived, notices nothing. I could hear it run away, and the dog perked up and looked up as soon as it ran off. so I knew I wasn't seeing things. I then immediately turned around. I used to live in the rural Philippines in a tiny fishing village. Right next to our house was a fenced off area that had been overgrown and really broken down. It looked really creepy at night, and a lot of people said it was haunted. From our rooftop, you could see a lot into it. One night I was staring at it and I saw a strange blue glow coming from inside and shadows moving across the windows. I couldn't place it at all because there's no noises, no one speaking or laughing. It really scared me. I was an avid backpacker until I moved to Cali last year for grad school. I've got a couple of spooky ones. Was up in Baker Wilderness right up on the Canadian border. Was on a 4-day backpack, 15 miles on the first day and 11 on the second, with plans to hike out the same way we came in. Mid-second day, we're pretty deep in the backcountry. Ranger's office warned us the trail wasn't regularly maintained and to expect slow going. There's lots of washouts and little bushwhacking, but we were close to the primitive site at that point. Suddenly, I noticed absolute silence. Now, I've spent a lot of time in the woods, and you start to get a sense for when things are gonna get dangerous. Whether that be because of an animal or something else. Today it's something else. We hike through some dense brush and get to a clear section of trail. Out of the woods from a steep bank to the left tumbles a guy, giving off really bad vibes. He was filthy, wearing a shirt missing all its buttons and nothing underneath. He was very malnourished and his pants were very loose. He only has a loop string for a belt. Worse, he's got a big revolver in his hand. He walks towards us, dragging an injured foot behind him, quickly pointing his gun, talking to himself. I decide to be chill, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't scared. Weird thing is that he didn't even notice us. He was basically on top of us about a meter away, stopped and looked at me, said, "Well, have you seen this person?" To which I responded, "We haven't seen anyone today." Without another word, he limps down the trail and we never see him again. We check in at the ranger station and they said there was no way to the other side and that they weren't aware of hikers. They said they'd look into it, but we never heard what happened after and we're not really sure what come of it. I'm not a ranger, but my story was pretty weird for me. I was camping on the west coast. I had back problems, so when I camp I sleep in my car. I had the back seat converted to a bench seat and put my sleeping bag there. I cover the car windows for privacy. Now early one morning I hear this rumbling sound. It's loud enough to wake me up. I'm a child of the suburbs, and what it really sounds like is when you push a shopping cart really hard and rough along the ground and parking lot, making lots of sound. Then the car gets bumped. Hard. It actually moves. I immediately start unzipping the sleeping bag and look inside. And quickly outside. I realize there's nothing there. I have no idea what it was to this day, and I think it might have been a bear. I'm not a ranger, but I was hiking in Andorra with a friend. Long story short, we ended up in Spain, found another trail and were following it without a map. A while ahead of us we see a man with 2 golden retrievers coming in the same direction. He looks young and is carrying climbing gear on his shoulder. We're rushing down the trail to catch up with him and finally do. We ask him for help with directions and he tells us exactly where we are and that we need to be going this way, and about 12 kilometers away there's a hotel. He says there's another smaller town about 6 kilometers away. and that he parked his car there. He says, "Hey, I'll give you a lift for the last 6 km if you like," but he says he's in a hurry. We're over the moon, so walk and hike for a while talking. His dogs are friendly and run circles around us. We're chatting away to the guy, and he is really nice, but my friend and I are tired, so we can't keep up pace for long. The trail bends away, and right then the man, now a bit ahead of us, disappears behind the bend. We get there a couple of minutes later and the trail's empty. No man, no dogs, even though the trail runs straight and we can see for miles. The two of us continue on alarmed, waiting to hear or see anything, or maybe get jumped by him, but nothing. We eventually get to town and make it to safety. We're completely freaked out by the sudden disappearance and can't really make any sense of it even today. One of the weirdest things that ever happened to me in the great outdoors was with my father and myself. Now, my father actually owned a lot of land and was a forest ranger, so him and being outside went hand in hand. There was one particular summer when we were building a cabin in some area of land that we owned. We actually had a really good time and enjoyed doing so together and were definitely bonding. However, one strange thing happened. Just as we'd finished doing everything and we were really happy, we take a moment to rest and drink some coffee. While we're doing this, my dad stops and says, "Hey, do you see that?" I look to my left and what I can only describe as a very old lady appears to have just shot behind a tree. We both look at each other in disbelief, and just as we do so, every single window that we had just installed immediately shattered. Seconds later, there was a very loud popping sound, like a depressurization. Me and my dad once again looked at each other in disbelief. My dad seems to be furious and sprints towards whatever this thing is, with me in hot pursuit. My dad wasn't worried about what had happened, he was just mad that something had just broke his cabin that we just spent all day fixing and making look good. And just as we got to there, we find nothing. No signs of life or anything ever being there or different. Now my dad's filled with a complete different look, one of fear, terror in fact. He says we're going home, and a few weeks later we actually take down the cabin and build a new one much closer to the home. My dad and I never actually spoke about it properly after, and as you can imagine it still terrifies me. Now one other strange thing that would happen is something that I'm not sure whether it was people playing tricks on me or what, but it's just really creepy. Now there's a piece of land that my dad owns that's really beautiful. I mean, it's scenic to say the very least. It has a beautiful river that runs down it, and I always had a good time hanging out there. I would always go here on my own. Now one of the strangest things that ever happened to me was I was sitting here alone when I hear a rock hit a tree. Confused, I look over to where it landed, and I can see more rocks. As I head over there, I can see my initials spelled out in the rocks, and some strange carvings and symbols on the ground of eyeballs and weird triangles. Now it's hard to describe, but it looks kind of like the Illuminati symbols, but not really. More like something a cult person would draw. Now I was pretty young at the time, so I'm terrified and sprint home. Now I decide not to tell my parents about it because I want to investigate the following day. As I do so, I go back, and everything's just as it was. There was literally no signs that anything was different, other than a slight dent on the bark of the tree where the rock hit. I still have no idea what it was to this day. I'm a 17-year-old high school guy with a weak body. I live in a small town in the Philadelphians, and this town is surrounded by rice fields, with a highway going straight across it. Part of my usual weekend routine is to go jogging early in the morning. This is at some time around 5 AM. My usual jogging route is from my house, somewhere in the middle of town, to a small hill with a wonderful view of town in the morning. To reach my destination, I would have to jog on the side of the highway. From time to time, fog would appear on the highway, and once you're inside, you can only see 10 or 15 feet before it all goes white. So one Saturday, I decide to jog. I invite one of my friends, the same age as me, to join me, since he follows the same route anyway. We left home at 5 AM, proceed to the highway. As usual, a thick fog blanketed the highway. The cars that would pass by had their lights on, and there were several one-ways because of road repairs. As we enter the fog, we decide to jog along the side of the road, past a couple of roadworks, about 100 meters along each. Now all's well at this point. We're a bit exhausted, but otherwise fine. We barely encountered anyone else, and usually they're just fellow joggers. Then we come across another roadwork, and we saw this guy crouched down on the asphalt. He was wearing a dirty orange vest, and he had a similarly dirty hard hat on. We can't really see his face, but decide just to ignore it. He looks as though he's fidgeting with something in his hands, so we thought he was just holding a few tools or something. Also, there was no one there but us, me, my friend and that guy. The fog's thick as hell. My friend signalled to me to keep a distance from the guy, and I followed him. When we get closer, we can hear him humming a strange tune under his breath, which in of itself isn't that weird, but boy, we were wrong. As we get closer, he starts acting erratically. He stopped for a moment as I passed him, then starts laughing. It wasn't a regular laugh. It sounded sinister and a little dry. It was really loud, so it began to freak me out. We didn't increase our speed at this point, as we think he's messing with us. But he doesn't stop. He just kept laughing and laughing, and we knew it was beyond a prank. I can't describe his laugh more than I just didn't trust it. We didn't look back. We were speeding up now, as we were starting to see the hill. I was gasping for air, but somehow I didn't let that stop me. I forced myself on, and my friend was doing the same. He was probably 50 meters behind us when I looked at him. He had stopped laughing, but now he was standing straight and staring at us. He called out to us in my language in an arranged tone. That's when adrenaline kicked in. I just ran and ran until we reached the hill. In hindsight, I don't know how I was able to push myself for so long. When we finally arrive at the top, we're exhausted and nearly collapse on a cement bench and stay there for over an hour. Like a breath of fresh air, my friend laughs in a comedic manner. We then walk towards home. I haven't ate yet, I was so hungry, and as we passed the road we saw the guy in. He's no longer there. The only people there are wearing construction outfits that are working on the traffic signals, but nowhere near the man. As I got home, I told my parents about it, and they said it's probably a nut job looking for someone to rob, who's probably stole the outfit, and I never went jogging again in the fog after that. This happened a few years ago when I was mountain walking. We started as a large group, but after some time of everyone choosing their own pace, I ended up walking alone. I was walking downhill through a thick forest area when I slipped on an unsteppable part of the trail, falling fully. It hurt quite a lot. Before I could get up, I see a deer walking out of the trees to my left, standing in front of me. This is not natural, because deers usually avoid human contact. Something was really off about this deer. I didn't know what. Its eyes appeared lifeless, filled with uneasiness. Then it opened its mouth to show multiple rows of what appeared to be razor-sharp teeth. and let out an ear-shattering scream. It sounded like nothing I ever heard before. It shouldn't exist. I watch quite a lot of horror movies, and yet none have come close to the scream of this. It was so demonic. After that scream, it closed its jaws and walked away to the side of the woods. Now, I've never told this story to anyone else before, but I'm sure what I saw was a Wendigo. It just horrifies me knowing that I saw this thing. For a second when it happened, I thought maybe I've hit my head, but I had no head injuries whatsoever and I knew exactly how I landed. It almost put me off running in the woods entirely. When I was young, I worked as a backpacking guide in Western NC. My schedule dictated a full 8-day shift with 6 days off. During those 6 days to myself, my other co-workers and me would play in the woods. In the summer, you can't beat a mountain swimming hole. One of our favourite activities was called Paradise Falls, alternatively called Wolf Creek Falls. This is a cliff jumping spot with a huge swimming area, a tiny slot canyon and an inner pool. Most will venture just to do the small jump, even though it's the smallest and arguably least accessible. Even though the jump is almost 9 foot at most, you must do 10 minutes rock scaling to get there. We are all adventuring in and out from inside this tiny canyon, and you can't see the main pool. Well, we got to the jump and coaxed the first person off, a fellow guide who had never been to the spot before. She jumped successfully and swam into the main pool and beach area. Then she screamed. Because she was now out of sight, myself and another guide jumped in together and swam the short distance to her, with the others in tow. Of course we figured she was injured somehow. She was treading water and just staring wide-eyed at the riverbank. When I looked to the shore, there stood a man. He's massive, easily 6'7", and appears to have no hair on him, wearing beat-up overalls. Perhaps the most disturbing is that he had folds of skin all over his body. Imagine the Michelin Man, but this is on his face, arms and chest, everywhere with these weird layers. He's also armed with a shotgun, staring intently at us. He just stood there and watched as we grab anything important and speed out of there. He walked slowly back into the forest and we never saw him again. Around 8 to 10 years ago, I was at a lake way out in the woods on some land that my dad owned. I was alone aside from my dog, a terrier. I had only been fishing on the little pier in the southeast corner for about 10 minutes when I get an almost overwhelming feeling of being in danger, and then notice something or someone watching me from the tree line on the opposite side of the lake. I was a kid, but somehow keep composure. For some reason, I felt it important that whatever it was did not know I was aware of them. Anyway, it started moving slowly from tree to tree, near taking its eye off me, but never truly facing away from me. The lake's about 70 yards wide, so I can't really see details, but I know where they're facing. After realizing that it was following me, I pull my pole down and walk down the pier and up the bank towards the trail back of our cabin, which is about 1/4 of a mile away. Once I hit the tree line, I bolted to the cabin and waited there with one of my dad's guns until my parents got home. The only witness I had was my dog, and he saw it as well. I know because when he saw the figure, he instantly starts growling in a low tone until I make him stop. I have no idea who or what it could have been or what the intentions are, but they're most certainly not good. This took place in southeast Mississippi near the Alabama border back in the 90s. We didn't live there, but we spent most weekends up there. I know it couldn't have been a normal person, because our nearest neighbour was a very old couple who literally lived miles away. Aside from the lake area that our cabin's on, the surroundings very thick forest. The figure was extremely tall as well. I have a very good memory, especially for details. Also, shortly before I noticed it, I got a very strong feeling that I was being watched. I never felt safe there again, and I was so glad my dad sold it. This incident happened to me when I was younger, probably around 19 or 20. I used to drive around the countryside in the woods for hours on end, up to literally 6 hours, smoke cigarettes while I listened to music daydreaming. I've been through a lot, so this is a nice way for me to let off steam and digest all the badness that happened to me in the past few years. There is a route that goes into the southern part of my state and eventually takes you to Maryland, if I'm not mistaken. If you keep going all the way, it will eventually take you to Florida. It was a road I found to be very fond as it intersected with a lot of interesting places. It could take you to cities and beaches alike, all the while somehow remaining isolated and rural. On one of those day trips, I was driving through a heavily wooded area that opens up into a field lined with trees on my left. I was pretty zoned out at this point, but something on the side of the road immediately caught my attention. In fact, it even seemed that time slowed, or I could see this apparition more vividly than any other thing I've ever seen in my life. What I saw was an older, balding man dressed in a full Catholic priest garb. His mouth is open, appearing to be in grief, screaming at the sky. He was standing in front of a dead deer, a buck. From what I recall, it was around 3 points, maybe 4. Behind the deer was a 1970s Crown Vic style police car with its lights on. It had no markings on it whatsoever to signify what country it's from. And no one's in the vehicle. I don't even think it had an engine running sound. It appeared as though the vehicle had been parked there all day. The other odd thing about this vehicle is that it has no damage on the front end to show that it's responsible for hitting the deer, nor was there any blood or anything. The deer seems fine. Taking a step back, trying to think of what I saw, it had the appearance of being staged or set up somehow, as if it was a prop for a movie. Everything was just so odd. For the speed I was travelling at, the glance I cast on this spectacle was only 4 seconds, but it's so abruptly singed into my mind now. I have never seen anything like it. For some reason I started crying after seeing it. Did the forces that shape time or something just merge and I saw something from back then? I don't know, I've even been on the same spot from this trip, and there's never a trace of it, not even the body of the deer or tyre tracks from the police car that could be seen. Like a breeze, it was gone. A thing so out of place it could not have been from its surroundings. I have no answers to any of these questions. Only a lack of closure for something that's scarring my brain. Oh, how it feels to be lost in the middle of nowhere with no idea where you are or how to get back. So, I'd like to share you my story. Now, My father was a park ranger, and apparently his dad was too, so my father and grandfather would often lecture me on the dangers of being out in the middle of nowhere by yourself, and how you have to be so careful because you don't know who's out there or what could happen. But me being a younger kid at the time, that did not bother me one bit. My mindset was, well, the further out into the woods I go, the more chance of adventure there's going to be for me. So I'd always like to go wandering off a little further than where I was supposed to go. You know, just kind of like typical kid stuff, I guess. But looking back on it now, it's much stupider. And of course, I was kind of blind to any stranger danger at the time. But I digress too much now, so I'd like to get to my story. Now, this isn't set in a beautiful, picturesque summer's day. No, this is set in the middle of a cold October month in winter. Now, at the time I'd finished school, and I wasn't working, and to be honest I didn't really know what I wanted. I used to work in some old shop somewhere. It was basically a big surplus store, and I really liked the owner and got on with him well there. I worked with him for a little while, but I had to quit because it was God. I can't put into words how bored I would get if I was in the back room on my own. I'd have to do work in there for 2 or 3 hours at a time. The thing was, customers would come in the front, but nobody would really want to talk to me, so I'd get really bored. Now, my grandparents kicked up a riot when I wanted to quit. They kind of still had the more older mindset that you have to keep a job, you don't know how quick they're going to come, but God, working for $6 an hour, or less I think, is not worth it. Especially once you finish school and you really want to have a good time. So yeah, I basically didn't know what I wanted. I wasn't really a big fan of what was being offered in school, and I'd been to the college open day things, but it really put me off, to be honest. The things they were showing me looked incredibly boring, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So having my adventure walks was one of my favourite things. I guess now it probably was out of pure boredom, but at the time it was the opposite. I eventually did become bored of being out in the woods on my own because after a while you kind of need more company, but it's what I did at the time. For me it was probably a good thing going in more winter months because I could kind of get away from everyone, and at times that was just what I wanted, just to be away and with myself for a while. So I say bye Mum, I'm going out, and she says please promise me you won't be too far but you have to be back in time for dinner. I say yeah, don't worry, I won't. That was no issue. Whenever my mum made my dinner it would always be too hot, so I wouldn't always end up eating it all. So I set out. I go across a small stream and I'm walking along a lake not far from where I live. Now the tree lines are absolutely beautiful here, and you have to be quite careful not to fall in the water. I have my raincoat on because yes, you guessed it, it's raining a lot now. And I just take a few seconds just to appreciate how beautiful the rainfall is onto the lake. I always used to think when I was younger these were some kind of animals, and my dad would used to joke that it's some kind of fish trying to get air, and me being stupid would believe him and beg him to go fishing to try and capture some of the fish. I'd even put my hands in trying to capture things and my dad would just laugh. Yeah, sometimes he could be quite funny like that. So for this particular adventure, I don't really have a direction. I just kind of wanted to get away from everything and the responsibilities of life, you know. I say that, it's not really like I had many back then, but God did it feel like it for me. So I continue walking while carefully avoiding different puddles and things. The leaves were kind of like a dark orange or red colour, I guess, and most of the trees themselves were barren of life. It kind of set a tone. It wasn't too far away from Halloween, and I actually kind of felt like it was a bit of a themed walk, so I guess it was good. So, just to the left of me is this beautiful lake, and to the right is a more dense forest. I eventually say goodbye to the lake as I continue on my walk. I'm basically following one of the streams uphill a bit, which is a direction I don't usually head in. Now the only annoying thing about doing this is that I got really wet really quick because of the water. Now As I continue up, I'm careful not to slip and fall on any of the mossy rocks. I eventually make it back up onto a big path, which I know sometimes people like to jog down, but not very often. It's quite a muddy track now, and I have to duck under the trees, which annoys me because I already have quite bad posture, even back then. The low-hanging branches keep slapping me in the face too, which is really annoying, but I continue. I decide to take a turn off of the normal path and go into the woods themselves a bit. I mean actually off the path. I eventually come up to a small bridge that I need to cross over, and this should lead me slightly further away from people. Just to the left of me is a continuation of the stream and the right, and I take a few seconds just to take in how beautiful everything is here. I continue, and I start to press quite deep into the woods. Now it's not dark, but I guess because of the clouds stopping any light piercing through, it's starting to look quite dark. But I know I've still got quite a good few hours of daylight, which is important because then I can be back in time before my mum gets me. Strangely, I notice a very bright orange tree up ahead of me. This is far brighter than any of the other ones I found around me, which I think is quite odd. Then I notice there's a few more like this, but I don't think much of it. I take a while to appreciate and I think to myself, God, I'm so lucky to be out here and away from everyone. I guess my mind kind of gets lost into the overthinking patterns, where I'm trying to think of what to do, what not to do, and what to chase. I know that I'm definitely on a different path from most people, but I don't know, I kind of just feel a bit like, I'm not sure what I want to do with school. I know I don't really want to study, but there's not much for me to do. I don't find much of anything interesting, really. I had a couple of friends at the time, but they really weren't the greatest, and they weren't necessarily people you could ask for advice. If you wanted advice about one thing, you get told something else, which would probably make your situation worse. Or sometimes when I would speak to my best friend, he would just ramble on and on about himself, and he wouldn't have paid any attention to what you said. He would literally wait for you to finish your sentence before immediately talking about himself, and it just kind of made me feel a bit trapped in my head. I didn't really want to talk to my parents about it. I kind of felt better talking to my friends, but like I said, I wouldn't really get much back in return. So yeah, here I am now, kind of getting lost in my own mind a bit, going deeper and deeper, ever so little, into the woods without realizing it. Now, a good indicator of being far away from normal is the fact that I haven't seen anyone. The rain will usually do this, but not to this degree. This was actually quite rare, to be honest. Again, I think this is odd, but here I am. So at this point, the rain started to slow down a little bit, which is quite nice, but I keep on getting hit in the face by random bits of water that are falling from the trees. Now, weirdly, I come across an abandoned road that I've actually never seen before. It's weird because you can tell this has been abandoned for a long time, but there's definitely no cars that have been on it recently, but why have I never noticed it? I think this is odd. It's kind of like more of a dirt road, but it's weird, it just looked really out of place. Now at this point, I'm walking through some trees that have more life to them, and I guess they look really pretty compared to everything. And once again, I begin getting lost in my mind. Now, when I'm walking, I realise every so often that there's a strange flash of light just coming from the right side of my eyes. Now, I'm actually quite paranoid that maybe I've got some kind of mega migraine coming on or something's wrong with my eyes. It seems like it's during every second step that I notice this weird flash of light. I try my best to ignore it and continue walking, but I can't seem to. It's really bizarre, it literally is like if I step down hard enough it does something, I don't know, maybe nerve related, and causes my eyes to go weird. It's strange because when I decide to remain completely still, I can't really see much of anything. Everything is completely normal, and there's no flashes. So I continue with my walk. But every so often, I'm struck with that flashing light again, and it's actually starting to annoy me a bit. I think, oh god, what now? I've already had quite a bad issue with my vision before, and I don't really have the best eyes, so I truly don't want things to get any worse for me. But every so often, I'm convinced I'm seeing a strange flashing light coming out the right side of my vision, and it will not stop. It's bizarre too, because even if I try and stop and replicate the steps I was doing, there's no flashes now. But hey, this is a problem to worry about if it persists, I tell myself. Though in the back of my mind, truthfully, I'm a little worried. Now, eventually I make it up to a really nice spot not far from a beautiful body of water, and I take a few seconds just to sit here. I've realised now that I'm truly not sure where I've gotten to, but up ahead of me I see a small, kind of man-made bridge thing. There's no water running under the bridge, but you can see that these stones have been arranged specifically for you to go somewhere. This is really odd because there's no trail path up here, and I haven't seen anyone at all, so nobody else is up this way, and just ahead of it you can see a path. This is strange because again, it kind of looks like a path someone's made, but it looks like no one ever goes up here. Now, just off to the left of me, I can see a strange figure just off in the distance, somewhat behind a tree. It's really bizarre, but they seem to sink slowly down into water, and I can't tell what it is. I think this is probably just a tree or something, so I just continue onwards. I'm walking now, splashing into the water. I don't care because my shoes are very waterproof, but as I'm doing so, every so often that flash comes back again. This time it's dead ahead of me. Now this is really odd now. There shouldn't be any flashes in front of me, and the problem I had earlier is out of the right corner of my eye, in my peripheral vision, not directly in front of me. But every time I stop and strain, I can't see anything or anyone. Bizarre. Convinced that there's something wrong with my eyes, I decide that I'm just gonna see what's up here, then I'm gonna head back home. Now while walking, I can see the abandoned remains of a campsite from long ago. It's a tent which has all holes in it, and it kind of looks like an old military issue one, but somewhat older. It's quite bizarre being there. It looks very out of place, and there's not really any signs of any life around here. I'm definitely going up to something that somebody used to live in, but I don't know who or why. So, I just keep going. Now, while I'm walking, I slip slightly and have to grip a tree quickly just to steady myself. As I do so, I look up and there seems to be quite a large, abandoned house up ahead of me. I can't really see it well, but it's basically in a different direction that I'm heading. I decide to go and investigate because why not? I then take my first few steps in that direction, and I hear a click sound now. It's not really like anything you'd be worried about, but it's quite a weird sound. It sounds like plastic being pressed down upon, but again, I don't give it much thought. I'm kind of just blinded to my problems ahead of me with my vision, thinking, oh god, am I going to lose some of my sight or what is this? And I start to panic a bit. Sometimes I can overthink about the smallest details, and that's basically what's happening, but I'm trying to put on a really brave face now. I continue walking, and there it is. It's not as big as I thought it was, but it's kind of like a big old cabin house thing. I don't know how to describe it. It doesn't look like anyone's been there recently, but there is a small muddy path that leads up to it, and I've come this far, so who am I not to continue on my adventure? So, I continue walking, this time sloshing in the leaves next to the path. I don't want to get my shoes too muddy even though they're waterproof because they're brand new pretty much, so I continue onwards. Now every so often I can see some kind of marking in the trees. It's almost like wooden carvings that almost look like they're there naturally, but you can tell they aren't. There's lots of lines and crosses on them, and this is weird. It's something I've not seen before. You can also see a rock formation that seems to channel some water stream down that's definitely man-made. I start to think maybe I've come up to some old logger's cabin and this is what they were looking for. Water. I don't know, it seems pretty bizarre. As I get closer and closer to the structure ahead of me, I have a feeling that maybe, just maybe, there's someone in there. I don't think it's entirely likely, however, and I continue going up to it, so I edge ever closer to this thing, not really thinking much of my surroundings. I eventually make it just outside of this cabin thing, and I just stand there for a moment, confused about what I'm seeing, and then my dad's voice kicks in my head. "Son, what are you doing there? What have I told you before?" I think, God, is this my dad really speaking to me or just my conscience? I look around and realise it's just in my mind, and my dad's advice has really struck to me now. I know I probably shouldn't explore this, but I've come this far now and I don't even know how to get back. Plus, if I ever wanted to go back to this place, it would probably be really difficult to find, so I decide that it's best for me to go on. I make my first few steps towards the porch area, and I try and look through the windows, but it's quite hard to see into this place. It's really quite a nice building, but it's gotta be probably 70 years old or so. It looks quite dated, and I just hope that the door opens. I give a quick hello, quite loudly, and I actually knocked on the door, half expecting somebody to open it, but nobody does. I think this is good because it's a sign I should be able to go in here without having too many issues. So I go ahead and try the door. Surprisingly, it does actually open, just a bit. I have to force my way in somewhat, and I take my first step in. I go to call out again, but I stop myself thinking, if someone's in here, they've definitely heard me, but nobody's replied. I'm then met with a really weird smell, one that I've not really smelt before, and it's absolutely disgusting. It smells like somebody's put tons of waste into one area and burnt it, then repeated the same process 20 times. It was awful. It actually makes me put my shirt over my nose just so I don't have to smell it. Honestly, it was so bad. Now, this place looks like it's been abandoned long ago, but strangely there's some signs of life. There's a kettle and other cooking utensils that don't look so dirty like the rest of this place, and there is a mattress and a bed in another room, but I don't bother going through there. Now, the smell seems to get worse as I head into the hallway. I then realise that there's steps going down, and there's lights on strangely at the bottom, just enough to illuminate the bottom of the stairs. Again, the sense of adventure takes over, and my dad's voice is screaming in my head to get out of there, but I don't do that. I just continue on. Now, I take my first few steps and I have to be careful because my shoes are wet, so it makes me start to slip a little bit and I steady myself. I now realise what I'm looking at. There's a little tunnel system just ahead of me. Now, it's a very tight squeeze, but there's light coming from it, and I go for it. Now, the floor's pretty dirty but very dry, and the gap's not very big. I can just about fit through it, and I'm not really that big. I'm still slender to this day, but I kind of worm my way through. I'm actually becoming quite claustrophobic, but managed to calm myself down, and I eventually squeeze through the gap. I steady myself up and I look around, and honestly, I'm still not sure what to think of it now. There's a really large basement area that it opens up into, and it's not what you'd expect to find. No storage or boxes, no spare bedroom, no boiler system, no nothing. There's a very dated laboratory, with all kinds of different specimens and things in dusty old jars that I can't really see well into. There's all kinds of chemical and things in vials everywhere. And strangely, there's no bad smell here, just the smell of chemicals. Now it must have been powerful because I can smell everything through the sleeve of my shirt that's covering my nose. Now, this is really bizarre. It literally looks like some kind of mad scientist laboratory underground, but why would it be hidden like this? I don't know. Now, I quickly go to switch sides of what's covering my face from my right sleeve to my left because I want to open another door I can see, and as I do so, I'm suddenly struck with that smell once again. That disgusting smell which is more powerful than the chemical smell that I'm feeling right now burning through my nose. It's coming from the door ahead of me. I take one step closer to the door and I look behind myself. There's definitely nobody else here, right? I take a step closer and I put my hand on the door and crash. There's a loud sound from above me. I have to hit my arm to stop me screaming. I immediately withdraw from the door and stop dead in my tracks. I can hear something or someone walking around up ahead of me. Oh god, you're really in trouble now. There's no way that I'm gonna go through that door that I put my hand on before, but I'm certainly trapped now. I stop absolutely dead still for God knows how long, and I don't hear any other sounds. It now dawns on me that I probably shouldn't stay in this room for too long because of the chemical smell, and that I also need to try and get out without making any sound. I've become as quiet as I possibly can, and I slowly take one step forward. I slowly begin to crawl and make my way through that gap. I continue until I'm almost at the end of it and I hear a door close above. Oh good, someone must be leaving, I think to myself. I then push myself clear and start slowly making my way towards the steps, being as quiet as possible. I take my first step on and it makes a slight creak sound. I stop immediately, so angry that there's no way I can get up here quietly. I realise I'm gonna have to wait it out now, and hopefully this person is gone, whoever they are, or however many there are. I wait for probably an hour, but realistically 15 minutes because of the adrenaline, and I start to make another step up those stairs. I must have only got about halfway up when there's another loud creak. I realise now I don't really have the option to move back. I turn around and I'm sure I can hear the door creak from in the other room that I didn't open. Half expecting some kind of zombie to come out and come and get me, I start to power forward and get ahead, just making it to the top of the stairs. I take a look around and there's no one, luckily. I'm frozen in place but absolutely aware of the sounds coming from behind me. I then slowly make my way to the front door and carefully close it behind me, and that's when I hear it. A kind of scream sound that I've not heard before. I can't figure out the direction that it's coming from, but I then realise that there's something just up on the tree line. It's a very dark figure. I realise that it's a person with extremely disgusting clothes who looks impossibly tall. He was probably about 6 feet 4 or 5, but to me at that age was an absolute giant. I say, hey, and again there's that scream sound. I realise this is someone I can't reason with, and that's when he starts running. Without making another sound, I can see his lanky silhouette beckoning towards me with something in his hand. I'm frozen in fear until eventually something kicks in and I bolt into life. I have no idea what direction I'm going in, but I know I have to get away from this person. Suddenly, it becomes clear that I need to get out of here, and I start sprinting into the woods. Now the problem is, I'm no longer on a path. I don't know what direction that I'm heading in, and I'm being hunted. I glance over my shoulder quickly, and I start crying a little bit. I can't see this person just yet, but I can see the cabin. I start sprinting and slowly making my way across different puddles and things, trying my best not to be heard and not to be seen. I can see more of the strange markings on the trees, and as I'm on my journey, I can see something just off to the left. It looks like another campsite, but this one's covered in bags, and that smell hits me again. Even at my most fear, I still realize how disgusting this thing smells. I eventually realize that I've come to an area where the trees are going to be really difficult to pass, and this area is very steep and probably really going to slow me down. I'm frozen for a second, and I look to my left and see a lake. There's a dated sign that says danger, deep water. I realize I can't go this way. I look back and I can hear him screaming again, not far away now. I can't see where he is, but he definitely knows where I am. I realize that my only option is to try and go up this steep hill, and I basically have to kind of swing from tree to tree to make it up here, half slipping the whole time. I scream, "Who are you and what do you want?" And there's silence now. Annoyingly, the sounds of the rain are basically covering up whoever this is chasing me, or however many there are. I've only seen one so far, but I have a feeling there might be more people. I make it up to kind of a flat area, and I have to catch my breath for a few seconds. Just as I'm doing so, there's that flashing again. I've realised now that it's probably the flash of a camera, and something is definitely going on here. I don't know if this is the same person chasing me as before, but my god is it weird. Now I know that somebody was taking pictures of me earlier, or at least that's what I think it is, or maybe it's my eyes going bad, but I don't know. I luckily make it to a more downhill area now that I know I can pick up the pace on, and being slender comes as an advantage in this situation because I can basically dart in between the different trees. I start saying aloud, "I'm sorry Dad, I'm sorry Grandpa, I should have listened to you both. I don't know what I'm doing out here on my own. I'm not a big strong ranger like you. I'm sorry." Really thinking these are going to be my last words. Crazy thoughts to have at such a young age. I wasn't necessarily annoyed at myself for going on the adventure, just more annoyed for being dishonest to my parents. I thought if I didn't make it, I would have hated the fact that I'd lied to them. Now I can no longer hear the screaming coming from behind me or see the flashes, so I start to walk a bit slower, desperate to get my breath back and suffering from quite a large adrenaline dump, feeling kind of weird. I keep walking, and I've realised that if I continue going downhill, I should eventually make it to a larger bridge which should be closer to civilization. I start following the edge of the lake, every so often looking behind me, and now at kind of like a light jogger's pace as I start to pick up speed again. I've probably been on the run for a good 20 or 25 minutes, which is an insanely long time to be running and sprinting through a forest going up and down hill. My legs actually feel like they're jelly, and I'm really scared that they're going to completely give way at some point and that I'm never going to make it back home. But luckily, just off in the distance is that bridge, and honestly it looks like the gates of heaven to me at this point. It honestly felt like I was taken to another world when I saw this and snapped back out of this crazy dream one. I then go as quick as I possibly can for another good 5 or 10 minutes, eventually making it over to that bridge. I'm too scared to look behind me once more. I've realised that my only option to really get out of here now is to wait for a car, and I stick my thumb up like I've seen in the films, and eventually a car stops for me. I quickly jump in and they ask what's wrong. I say, nothing, I'm just a bit far from home, and I say where you need to take me. And then the driver just looks at me and says, well, you're a long way from home, but don't worry, I'm heading over that way. I'll happily give you a ride there. And I kind of zoned out and didn't say anything for the next hour or so. I then ask how much further is it, and the driver says about another 50 minutes, and it hits me just how far away I've gone from the area that I knew. I must have been out for hours, but I guess your time kind of gets distorted when you're in a traumatic situation. Eventually, they drop me just off where I can quickly depart and jog the rest of the way home. I say thank you, and I do that. I never even caught the name of this driver, but I really wish I did because I'd love to thank them now. They probably ended up saving my life by dropping me off. I just wish I could have told them what happened, but I just couldn't. I was too scared. I eventually got home and surprisingly had only missed dinner by about 10 minutes, so my mum wasn't too angry. Now my mum would have done me for absolute murder had she have known what had happened, and God knows what my dad would have done, so this story remained a secret up until now when I decided to share it. Now, I don't know exactly where the area is. It would be impossible for me to find now, as I'd moved town and so did my parents. But my God, I don't know what I discovered that day, but I can only imagine it was either some kind of drug den, or maybe somebody was doing God knows what out in those woods. I just hope to God that nobody else ever had to discover it like me, but I hate how stupid I was for going to investigate.